Part 1. Arms and the man I sing, who first from the fiery shores of Troy, exiled by an unyielding fate, journeyed to Italy and the Lavinian beaches. He was ceaselessly buffeted both on land and across the vast, tumultuous sea, by the relentless will of the gods, specifically the fierce, unforgetting anger of Juno. He also endured immense suffering in battle until he could finally establish a city and bring his cherished household deities, the Penates, to Latium. From this valiant hero sprang the lineage of the Latins, the Alban Fathers, and ultimately, the towering walls of Rome itself. The dark, storm-tossed waters of the Mediterranean offered no mercy to the fleet of exiles. 7 long years they had drifted since their homeland was consumed by flames. Lightning tore through the sky above 13 ships, carrying the last vestiges of a once proud civilization. These were refugees who clutched their sacred relics in trembling hands, their hearts scarred by immeasurable grief. The wind-lord Aeolus, at the jealous command of Juno, had unleashed every fury of the sea against these wanderers. Their only crime was surviving what the Achaeans had failed to utterly destroy. But Neptune, the majestic lord of the depths, would not tolerate another deity's chaos encroaching upon his realm. The Sea King, with a single, potent word, stilled the raging waves, and the scattered vessels found themselves inexorably swept toward the African coast, toward the nascent city of Carthage. This course led them toward a destiny that would, paradoxically, save one heart, while irrevocably shattering another. It is here, within the resplendent court of Queen Dido, that the wandering prince would finally recount his arduous tale. Part 2. The Phoenician queen, herself an exile who had fled her brother's murderous ambition with her loyal followers, listened with ever-growing fascination to this weather-beaten hero. His broad shoulders visibly bore the crushing weight of a fallen world. She understood intimately the profound ache of displacement, the immense burden of attempting to forge something entirely new from the charred ashes of what was irretrievably lost. Her eyes, dark and deep as the Sidonian purple that adorned her, absorbed his every word as the prince began to speak of that dreadful night his beloved city died. "O Queen!" the hero commenced, his voice heavy, almost choked, with the weight of memory. "You compel me to relive an unspeakable grief, to recount how the Achaeans overthrew our kingdom and describe her pitiful, agonizing downfall, those most sorrowful sights I witnessed myself, and in which I, too, played no small part. Indeed, what Myrmidon, what Dolopian, what hardened soldier of the stern Odysseus could possibly refrain from tears in the telling of such a harrowing story? The narrative truly began with an act of profound treachery, cunningly disguised as a sacred tribute. After a grueling decade of unrelenting siege, the enemy's ships had seemingly vanished from the embattled shore. They left behind only a towering wooden engine, massive and imposing as a mountain, crafted with what appeared to be divine artistry. The citizens, emboldened by the sudden silence, poured from their gates to behold this immense wonder. They walked through the abandoned camp, a sight where, for 10 long years, their relentless foes had sharpened their spears and meticulously plotted the city's ultimate destruction. Part 3. Some among the joyous crowd eagerly urged that the colossal wooden structure be dragged within the city walls. What gift, they reasoned, could possibly be more fitting for Minerva's sacred citadel? Others, however, wiser and more steeped in suspicion, sagely counseled its immediate destruction, sensing a hidden danger within its imposing form. But then, a figure emerged, Sinon, the arch-deceiver, whose artful lies would ultimately prove far more deadly than any bronze-tipped spear ever could. Captured by shepherds, this seemingly desperate refugee wove a meticulously crafted tale of sacrifice and miraculous escape. He claimed his former comrades had painstakingly built the monumental wooden horse to appease Minerva's furious anger, enraged by the audacious theft of her sacred palladium. He further asserted that they had planned to offer his own innocent blood to ensure their safe passage home. "Break it down!" cried some, their voices still filled with suspicion. But Sinon's clever, persuasive tongue skillfully painted the wooden engine as an offering far too sacred to harm, too potent, too divinely imbued to destroy. They built it exceptionally tall, he cunningly claimed, specifically so that the Trojans could never possibly bring it through their narrow gates. For if they did, if they truly welcomed Minerva's divine gift into their impregnable citadel, then Asia, he promised, would miraculously turn the tide of war, and Dardanian spears would one day, inevitably, threaten the very walls of distant Greece. What mere mortal, indeed, can genuinely resist the seductive lure of a prophesied victory over ancient, deeply entrenched enemies? Part 4. Yet, even as hopes swelled, the Olympians themselves sent dire warnings. Omens that might well have saved the doomed city if mortal pride had not rendered its people utterly deaf to divine truth. Laocoon, the venerable priest of Neptune, came running frantically from the altar, his 2 young sons beside him, crying out with desperate urgency to the assembled crowd. "Oh, wretched citizens, what madness, what utter folly is this? Do you truly believe the enemy has simply sailed away? Do you genuinely think any Achaean gift, especially one of this magnitude, comes without profound treachery? Is this, then, how you have come to know the cunning Odysseus? Either warriors are cunningly hidden within this massive wooden structure, or it is a formidable siege engine, meticulously built to overlook our impregnable walls, to spy on our very homes, and to descend upon the citadel from above. Or perhaps, some other insidious trick lies concealed within. Do not, I implore you, trust this thing. Whatever it truly is, I fear the Greeks, even when they bear what appear to be gifts." He then, with immense strength and conviction, hurled his mighty spear directly at the creature's belly, and the weapon struck, quivering ominously in the curved, hollow wood. The massive, hollow chambers of the horse echoed with a deep, unsettling groan. And if divine will had not been perverse, if mortal minds had not been utterly blinded by folly and deception, Laocoon would have surely compelled them to shatter that Achaean den with steel. And then, the kingdom of Troy would still stand, and Priam's lofty citadel would still proudly endure. Part 5. But then, as if to seal the city's grim fate, the final, most terrifying omen appeared. From the island of Tenedos, across the deceptively calm seas, came twin serpents, monstrous beyond imagining. Their colossal coils lashed the tranquil water, their crimson crests towering menacingly above the waves. They made directly for the shore with a purpose both celestial and utterly terrible. Their eyes burned with a malevolent light, like blood and fire commingled, and their forked tongues flickered menacingly from their hissing mouths. The people scattered in abject terror, but the serpents had arrived for one singular, dreadful purpose. They seized Laocoon's 2 young sons, wrapping their mighty coils around the boys' tender bodies, seemingly feeding on their fragile limbs. When the priest himself, driven by paternal agony, ran to help, weapons clutched firmly in his hand, they ensnared him too in their enormous spirals, twice winding their scaly backs around his waist, twice around his throat, while their monstrous heads and necks towered menacingly above him. He strained with all his might to burst their constricting knots with his bare hands. His sacred headbands now soaked with gore and black poison, while he raised terrible, guttural cries to heaven. His bellows were like the agonizing sound of a bull that had fled, wounded, from the altar, shaking the ill-aimed axe from its neck. The twin serpents, their dreadful work done, slithered away to the stern shrine of Minerva and took refuge beneath the goddess's feet and within the protective circle of her shield. Part 6. Then, indeed, a fresh wave of paralyzing terror crept through the hearts of all the trembling witnesses. They whispered among themselves that Laocoon had justly deserved his dreadful fate, paying the ultimate price for his impious crime of striking the sacred wooden horse with his spear, of hurling his unholy weapon at the monument's revered back. "Bring the statue to its home!" they cried with renewed fervor. "Let us pray to the divine presence, to appease Minerva's wrath." Yet one lone voice still desperately cried warnings into the gathering wind. Cassandra, golden-haired, the tragic daughter of Priam, opened her lips to prophesy the inevitable doom that was coming with the encroaching darkness. But by Apollo's cruel curse, no citizen, not a single soul ever believed her words. In vain, she spoke of devastating fire and torrents of blood, of Achaeans pouring forth from the engine's monstrous belly, of Priam's agonizing death, and the kingdom's utter destruction. Her divine gift was undeniable knowledge. Her terrible curse was to watch the undeniable truth be ignored, dismissed, and disbelieved until it finally became an unbearable, inescapable reality. Blinded by delusion, they cut into the city's ancient walls and laid open the formidable fortifications, dismantling their own defenses. All applied themselves with feverish urgency to the work, meticulously placing sliding rollers under the monument's massive feet and stretching thick hemp ropes around its neck. The deadly machine, pregnant with armed men, slowly mounted the walls. Boys and unmarried girls, oblivious to the impending horror, sang sacred songs around it, and joyfully touched the rope with their innocent hands. It advanced, sliding menacingly and inexorably into the very heart of the citadel. Part 7. O my native land! O holy Troy, home of the divine! O Dardanian walls, once so famous and formidable in battle! 4 times, as if by some ominous sign, the colossal wooden horse struck at the threshold of the Scaean gate. And 4 times, the hidden weapons within its hollow belly clanged ominously. Yet, the Trojans, blinded by a collective fury and a desperate, misguided hope, pressed on, relentlessly, and finally positioned the monstrous effigy in their most sacred heart, within the very walls of their holiest sanctuary. As night descended on what would irrevocably be the city's last day, the people, unaware of their impending doom, celebrated with unbridled revelry. Wine flowed like rivers through the streets, and the citizens, at long last freed from a decade of suffocating siege, danced joyously in their streets, and sang loudly in their grand halls. Children, innocent and oblivious, played where hardened warriors had so recently died, and lovers whispered tender promises they would, tragically, never live to keep. In the wooden engine's cavernous belly, hidden warriors, coiled and silent, waited with bated breath for the predetermined signal that would, in a single, devastating stroke, end their world. It was at this crucial, terrifying juncture that the ghost of Hector, Troy's greatest champion, appeared to the sleeping Aeneas. But it was not the glorious hero who had been the kingdom's shield and spear, the formidable bulwark against all enemies. Instead, it was Hector as he died, brutally torn by Achilles' chariot, his once magnificent body black with gore, his swollen feet pierced through with cruel leather thongs. Part 8. How utterly changed he was from that triumphant champion who had returned to the city, proudly wearing Achilles' stolen armor, or from the formidable warrior who had hurled devastating fire upon the enemy's ships. His once noble beard was matted with grime, his hair clotted with congealed blood, bearing all those gruesome wounds he had received fighting so valiantly around his native walls. Alas, flee, son of the goddess! The spectral spirit urgently warned. And snatch yourself from these encroaching flames! The foe now holds the walls. The kingdom falls from her high, once impregnable place. Enough has been given, more than enough, to country and to Priam. If the citadel could possibly have been defended by any mortal hand, it would assuredly have been defended by this one, by mine. The homeland now commends to you her most sacred things and her cherished household deities. Take them as companions of your arduous destiny. Seek out mighty walls for them. Walls which you will establish at long last, when you have wandered far across the boundless sea. The phantom spoke these solemn words and then, from the innermost shrine, brought forth the venerable, mighty Vesta, with her sacred headbands, and the eternal, inextinguishable fire, the Penates, the household powers that absolutely must be carried to the new kingdom, destined to rise across the western waters. But the hero, jolted awake, found himself amidst real flames, not mere dreams. Through the citadel ran the terrifying sound of clashing arms and the desperate, dying cries of men. From the rooftop, he could witness all of Ilium caught firmly in the enemy's merciless grip. Part 9. Houses were collapsing in vast, catastrophic ruin, like ancient ash trees that competing farmers, with relentless steel, hack repeatedly. They threatened to fall, their mighty heads shaking and trembling precariously, until at last, overcome by their deep, mortal wounds, they yield a final, agonizing groan and break, dragging widespread destruction down the mountainside. The Achaeans had poured forth from their monstrous wooden womb like a black, unstoppable river of death. Sinon, the cunning deceiver, had unlocked the engine's hidden door, and disciplined warriors had silently slipped down ropes into the unsuspecting, sleeping citadel. Odysseus, that master of stratagem, and Menelaus, the king whose wife had sparked this terrible war, along with Pious the constructor, and countless others whose gleaming bronze armor glinted ominously with bloodlust in the flickering firelight. They immediately opened the main gates to allow in their comrades who had returned under the shroud of darkness. And now, the kingdom of Troy burned with an unholy fire, while its people died in agonizing screams. Through the thick, suffocating smoke and the horrifying screams, the prince fought his way with desperate ferocity toward the palace, gathering whatever surviving men he could. Rhipius, most just among the defenders, Charybdis, mad with a hopeless love for the prophet Cassandra, Dymas and Hypanis, and others whose names would tragically perish with their homeland. They stripped armor from the corpses of fallen enemies and fought, disguised as foes, hoping to sow confusion and gain an advantage. But what, indeed, could so few do against so many? Against such an overwhelming tide of destruction? Part 10. At the very heart of the palace, amidst the raging inferno, they discovered King Priam, his aged hands struggling to arm himself with weapons his old limbs could barely lift. Meanwhile, Queen Hecuba and her daughters huddled together like terrified doves, driven by the dark storm of war, seeking refuge around the household altar, their last desperate hope. "My poor, poor husband!" the queen cried out, her voice a raw lament. "What mad thought, what utter delusion, drives you to strap on these weapons now? Where are you rushing, in such a desperate state? This is certainly not the kind of help, not the kind of strength, that this terrible time demands. Not even if my own Hector were here now, in his prime. Come here, please. This sacred altar will protect us all, or we will die together, intertwined in our final moments." But Priam's inevitable end was already indelibly written in blood and marked by the deepest betrayal. Pyrrhus, Achilles' brutal and merciless son, burst violently through the palace doors, his armor streaming with fresh gore, his face terrible, contorted with an inherited rage that mirrored his father's ferocity. He struck down Polites, the youngest of Priam's sons, directly before his horrified parents' eyes, then turned his dripping spear on the king himself. "Now you will carry this message to my father, Achilles, in the shades below." The young warrior snarled, and with savage force drove his blade deep into the old man's side. Thus died Priam, who had once ruled over so many diverse peoples and vast lands of Asia. His mighty trunk now lying headless on the shore, his head torn from his shoulders, a nameless, desecrated corpse. Part 11. It was then, in that moment of utter despair, that Venus, the Divine Mother, revealed herself to her son, showing him the terrible truth hidden behind the raging flames. "Not Helen's captivating beauty," the goddess declared, her voice calm amidst the chaos, "nor Paris's perceived guilt causes this ruin. It is the immortals, the merciless powers who deliberately overthrow this kingdom and topple the citadel from its soaring heights. Look! I will tear away the dense cloud that now veils your mortal sight and dulls your human vision. Here, where you perceive broken stones and massive rocks torn from their very foundations, and smoke thickly mixed with dust, Neptune himself is violently shaking the walls and foundations with his mighty trident, tearing the entire city from its ancient place. Here Juno, most fierce of all goddesses, is the first to seize the Scaean gates. And, girded in gleaming steel, she calls her allied forces from the ships. Now look! Tritonian Pallas is already seated majestically on the heights, gleaming ominously from the storm cloud, accompanied by her terrible Gorgon shield. The father himself, Jupiter, supplies courage and favorable strength to the Hellenes. He himself rouses the immortals against the defending forces. This divine revelation struck Aeneas like a bolt of lightning. This was not mere human conquest, driven by mortal ambition, but the inescapable will of heaven itself. The kingdom was predestined to fall so that something far greater, something more enduring, might rise from its ashes. The celestial powers had deliberately turned their faces from the citadel, and no mortal hand, however brave, could possibly restore what celestial purpose had decreed must inevitably end. Part 12. Racing desperately through the burning streets, the prince, filled with a new, grim determination, finally reached his father's house where old Anchises sat, unmoving and resolute, amidst the surrounding chaos. "You others can flee," the old man declared, his voice firm. "Your blood is fresh, your strength unbroken. If the immortals had truly wished to preserve my life, they would have certainly saved this home. It is enough, more than enough, that I have witnessed one capture and survived one fall of the citadel. Say farewell to this body as it lies here, and depart. I will find death with my own hand. The foe will pity me and eagerly seek my spoils. The loss of proper burial is easily borne. But the devoted son would not, under any circumstances, abandon the man who had given him life and wisdom." As he pleaded passionately with his father, a miraculous sign suddenly appeared, decisively settling the argument. Little Iulus, the prince's young son, stood between them, and suddenly a delicate tongue of flame appeared to flicker harmlessly around the boy's head. It was a sacred, harmless fire that gently licked his soft hair and fed around his temples, causing no pain or damage. In alarm, both men rushed to shake out the flames and, instinctively, quench the sacred fire with water. But Anchises, understanding the true meaning of the omen, lifted his eyes to the stars and, with profound reverence, raised his hands and voice to heaven. "Almighty Jupiter, if you are moved by any prayers, look upon us, just this once. And if we deserve it by our devotion, grant aid afterward, Father, and confirm this omen." Part 13. Scarcely had the old man spoken these fervent words when sudden thunder crashed ominously on the left, and a brilliant star, trailing a bright path of light, glided from the sky through the deep shadows. They watched it pass swiftly over the rooftops, its luminescence disappearing as it buried its brightness in the dense forests of Mount Ida, its long, luminous wake gleaming powerfully behind it. The entire region around them smoked with the acrid scent of sulfur. Then, indeed, the father, now completely convinced and heartened, raised himself up, addressed the celestial powers, and revered the sacred star. Now there is no longer any delay," he declared with newfound conviction. "I follow, and where you lead, I am irrevocably there. Divine ones of my fathers, save my house, save my grandson. This omen is yours, and the kingdom is firmly under your celestial authority." So, Anchises yielded at last to the undeniable force of fate and destiny. The son, with immense strength and devotion, lifted his father onto his broad shoulders, a truly beloved burden, while little Iulus, with his shorter stride, grasped his father's hand, following his steps. Behind them came Creusa, the prince's devoted wife, and the few loyal servants who had miraculously survived the night's horrific slaughter. They moved through the deep shadows of the burning city, a place where before he had feared no weapons, no throngs of opposing warriors. Now, every subtle breeze terrified him. Every sudden sound startled him, as he was anxious equally for his precious companion and his heavy, sacred burden. And now he was approaching the gates, thinking he had completed the whole perilous journey when suddenly the distinct sound of many running feet seemed to reach their ears, and his father, peering through the oppressive darkness, cried out, my son, flee! They are coming near! I see their glowing shields and the bronze gleaming ominously." Part 14. In the overwhelming confusion of that terrifying moment, some hostile, malevolent power seemed to scatter his wits. robbing him of clarity and memory. For while he desperately followed winding pathways and left the familiar district of streets, fate, with a cruel twist, snatched away Creusa, his wretched, beloved wife. Whether she merely stopped, or perhaps wandered from the road, or sat down, utterly weary, he did not know. Never again was she restored to their eyes. He did not look back for his lost wife, nor did he even notice she was irrevocably gone until they finally reached the ancient, sacred mound of Ceres and her venerable temple. Here, when they were all assembled, and she alone was conspicuously missing, she escaped the notice of her companions, her son, and her distraught husband. What man, what deity? Did he not furiously blame in his raging madness? What more cruel sight did he witness in the citadel's complete overthrow than this sudden, inexplicable loss? He reluctantly entrusted Anchises, his son, and the precious household powers to his companions, and hid them safely in a winding valley. He himself, now girding on his gleaming armor, immediately returned to the burning streets. He was grimly determined to renew every risk, to retrace his steps through all the smoking ruins, and once again to recklessly expose his life to the myriad dangers of the burning city. Through the empty, smoke-filled streets he searched frantically, calling her name until the very stones themselves seemed to echo with his profound, agonizing grief. Part 15. Then, in a moment both miraculous and heartbreaking, Creusa's ghost appeared to him, larger and more ethereally beautiful than in life. She spoke words of profound comfort and chilling prophecy. "Why do you indulge in such mad grief, my sweet husband? These things do not happen without celestial will. It is not right for you to take Creusa as your companion from here. The high ruler of Olympus, Jupiter himself, does not allow it. Long exile awaits you, and you must plow vast stretches of sea, enduring immense hardships. And you will eventually come to Hesperian land, where the Lydian Tiber flows gently through rich fields, fertile and welcoming. There, happy times and a new kingdom and a royal wife await you. Stop weeping for beloved Creusa. I will not see the proud homes of the Myrmidons or the Dolopians, or go as a slave to Achaean matrons. I, a Dardanian woman and daughter-in-law of divine Venus, am destined for a different path. Instead, the great mother Cybele keeps me on these shores, in this sacred realm. And now, farewell, and preserve your love for our common son." When she had spoken these final, poignant words, she left him, weeping inconsolably and wanting desperately to say many things, and faded into thin air. 3 times he tried to throw his arms around her ethereal neck. 3 times the phantom, grasped in vain, escaped his hands, like light breezes, most like a fleeting, insubstantial dream. So at last, the night over, he returned, heartbroken, to his companions. And here he found, gathered together, a surprising number of new followers, mothers and men, youth assembled for exile, a pitiful crowd. They had come together from all sides with courage and what few resources they had, ready for whatever lands he wished to lead them across the sea. And now the morning star was rising over the ridges of high Mount Ida, bringing the new day, and the enemy held the thresholds of the gates in siege. Nor was any hope of help given. He yielded. And lifting his father, he sought the mountains. Part 16. Thus Ilium, the once glorious city, died. And thus were born the wanderers who would carry the kingdom's deities and its profound destiny across the wine-dark waters to a new, uncharted world. The devastating flames that had consumed one ancient realm would, in a grander design, kindle another, greater and more enduring, on distant Italian shores. But first, there would come 7 arduous years of wandering, of raging storms and terrifying monsters, of love both found and tragically lost. This period of trials would pass before the sword could be finally exchanged for the plough, before the new citadel could rise triumphantly from the ashes of the old. The wine-dark Mediterranean, vast and unforgiving, stretched endlessly before the refugee armada. 20 keels, bearing the last survivors of a civilization that now existed only in fragile memory and desperate hope. For 7 long years, they had wandered these unpredictable waters, following prophecies half understood, and omens that often seemed to mock their every valiant attempt at finding a new home. Anchises' son, with a voice growing heavier with each recounted hardship, continued his tale to the Phoenician queen, describing each false dawn, each cruel betrayal by fortune, each profound loss that had carved deeper and deeper hollows in his weary heart. From burning Ilium, he recounted to Dido, "We sailed first to the nearby, treacherous shores of Thrace, where I began to build walls for a new citadel, and gave it the name Aeneid, after myself, though I knew not then if fate would truly favor my arduous work. I was in the midst of offering sacrifice to my divine mother, Venus, and to the powers that bless new beginnings, and was slaying a pure white bull to the supreme king of heaven upon the desolate shore." Part 17. But Thrace, instead of offering refuge, held horrors that made the survivors question whether any land would truly welcome them, or if their suffering was to be endless. When the exiled hero began cutting branches for the sacrificial altar, dark, viscous blood seeped eerily from the broken wood and stained the earth with an unholy gore. A second, hesitant attempt brought forth a chilling groan from beneath the desecrated soil. And then a voice, filled with agony, that chilled every heart present to its very core. "Why do you tear at my wretched body, stranger? Spare me, now that I am buried. Spare the pollution of your impious hands. I am no stranger to you. I am Polydorus. Here an iron crop of spears covered my pierced body and grew up into sharp javelins. Polydorus, the youngest son of Priam, had been sent by his father to the king of Thrace with the city's treasure for safekeeping, a desperate measure during the siege. He had been brutally murdered when the war turned decisively against the defenders of Troy. The Thracian king, seeing which way the winds of fortune blew, had treacherously killed his innocent guest and callously seized the gold. Now the boy's tormented spirit cried out from soil made unholy by betrayal and greed. No foundation, no new life, could possibly be laid on ground watered with innocent blood. The convoy departed Thrace in utter horror, carrying with them the grim knowledge that even former allies could not be trusted, that the world had changed in profound ways that made every seemingly safe harbor utterly suspect. They sailed next to Delos, the sacred island of Apollo, where King Aeneas welcomed them with the warmth of kinship. Part 18. For King Aeneas remembered Anchises from their shared youth, a bond of ancient friendship. At the sacred shrine on Delos, where, by divine decree, no woman could give birth and no man could die, they desperately sought the Delian oracle for clear guidance to their destined home. Enduring offspring of Dardanus, came the resonant divine voice from the laurel grove. The same ancient land that first bore your noble race from its fertile breast will welcome you back to her abundant bosom. Seek out your ancient mother. There, the house of the exile will rule over all shores, and his children's children, and those born from them. Ancient mother! But which specific land had first nurtured the Dardanian line? Old Anchises, learned in ancestral law and lore, believed the oracle spoke of Crete, the great island realm where Jupiter himself was born, where Teucer had originated before founding the bloodline in Anatolia. There is Mount Ida, the elder reasoned, his voice filled with conviction. There, the very cradle of our race. Cretans have 100 great cities, the richest of realms. So, to Crete the barks of the Trojan fleet turned. And there the wanderer began building Pergamia, naming it with bittersweet memory for their lost citadel. The colonists rejoiced to hear that beloved name, and to begin raising walls once more, a symbol of renewed hope. But scarcely had they begun to build their new homes and assign plots for cultivation when a wasting disease, a terrible plague, fell upon their crops and people. The constellation of the dog star Sirius scorched the fields with a relentless plague, and the sickly year yielded only death and bitter, barren harvests. Old Anchises, with his innate wisdom, counseled return to Delos for clearer, more explicit guidance. Part 19. But the Penates themselves, the very household gods they so faithfully carried, appeared to their guardian, Aeneas. in a vivid dream, bringing a divine revelation that would spare him that arduous journey. What Apollo would tell you at Delos, we deliver here, directly to you. We who have followed you from burning walls, who have sailed with you over the swelling seas, who will raise your future sons to the stars and grant empire to their city. Prepare great walls for a great people, and do not abandon the long, arduous toil of exile. You must change your dwelling. It was not to these shores that the Delian Apollo spoke. Nor did Apollo bid you settle in Crete. There is a place the Hellenes call Hesperia, an ancient land, powerful in arms and rich in fertile soil. The Oenotrian people once dwelt there. Now, report says their descendants have called the nation Italy, from their leader's name. That is our true home. Italy, the western land beyond the sunset, where destiny waited like a patient, devoted lover. But the sea roads to Hesperia were long and treacherous, guarded by monsters that haunted sailors' nightmares and storms that could scatter armadas like autumn leaves. Departing Crete, they encountered the Strophades, a cluster of floating islands where dwelt the Harpies, monstrous birds with human faces. Creatures of divine vengeance whose claws dripped filth, and whose voices shrieked terrifying prophecies. When the hungry refugees landed and prepared to feast on the island's cattle, these abominations swooped down to befoul their food with excrement and fill the air with hideous, ear-splitting cries. Part 20. The valiant captain and his men drew their swords and fought the abominable creatures, but bronze could not wound things born of divine wrath. Cellino, the eldest and most fearsome of the Harpies, perched on a high cliff and shrieked down a prophecy that froze their very blood. Would you make war on us for slaughtered cattle, sons of Laomedon, and audaciously drive the guiltless Harpies from their ancestral realm? Take then these ominous words and fix them firmly in your mind. What the Almighty Father, Jupiter, foretold to Phoebus Apollo, Phoebus Apollo told to me, and I, the greatest of the Furies, now revealed to you. You head for Italy and call on the winds. To Italy you will indeed go, and be allowed to enter its harbors. But you will not wall your destined city until dire hunger, and the wrong of trying to drive us out make you gnaw and devour your very tables. Tables? What, in the name of the gods, could that enigmatic prophecy truly mean? The oracle hung over them like a terrible curse as they fled those cursed isles, sailing north toward the coast of Epirus, where Helenus, Priam's prophetic son, had carved out a new kingdom after the fall of Troy. Here they found wonders that brought both profound joy and lingering sorrow, a new Pergamum, a scaled-down Simois river. Fellow survivors who had painstakingly built an echo of their lost homeland. Helenus, blessed with Apollo's gift of prophecy, received them with tears of recognition and kinship's warmth. Here too was Andromache, Hector's sorrowful widow, now wed to her brother-in-law Pyrrhus, performing solemn funeral rites at an empty tomb she had built for her first husband's memory. The sight of the wanderer brought flooding back vivid, painful memories of burning towers and dying heroes, and she wept openly to see in him the ghost of her beloved Hector. Part 21. Do you truly live, son of the goddess? She asked through her torrent of tears. Are you brought here by your own fate, or if the light of life has left you, where, oh where, is Hector? The prophet King Helenus proved a far more reliable guide than any enigmatic oracle. He warned them explicitly of the perilous journey ahead, the treacherous straits between Sicily and Italy, where Scylla and Charybdis waited to devour vessels, their monstrous jaws ready. He advised the longer, safer route around Sicily's southern cape that would spare them those monsters' deadly embrace. He also emphasized the crucial need to pray to Juno, despite her enduring enmity towards the Trojans, to appease her wrath. Most importantly, he spoke of the Sibyl of Cumae, the ancient priestess who would guide the hero through the underworld itself to meet his father's spirit and learn the full, terrifying scope of his destiny. When in your uncertainty, the prophet concluded, you will find a huge white sow lying under the oaks by the bank of a river, resting on the ground with 30 newborn white piglets around her teats. That will be the place for your city. That will be certain rest from your labors. From Epirus, the convoy sailed toward Italy, But the arduous journey was far from ended. At the very heel of the peninsula, they glimpsed the gleaming temple of Minerva on the Salentine headland. Then they rounded the coast past Tarentum, notorious for its harbor, where Pyrrhus had once launched his expedition against Rome. Here they unexpectedly encountered Achaemenides, a wretched, abandoned sailor from Odysseus's crew. When that cunning hero escaped from the Cyclops' cave, the abandoned wretch, thin with starvation and mad with terror, fell on his knees before them. Part 22. "By the stars, I beg you," he pleaded, his voice hoarse with desperation. "By the powers above and the very light of heaven that we breathe, take me away from here, sons of Dardanus. Carry me to any lands you will. That will be enough. I know I am one who sailed with the Grecian armada. I confess I made war on your household shrines. For that, if my crime is so great, scatter me in pieces on the waves and drown me in the vast sea. If I perish, I will be glad to perish by the hands of men, not by the claws of a monster." His harrowing tale of Odysseus's brutal encounter with Polyphemus the Cyclops chilled their very blood. He recounted how the giant devoured men like mere grapes, how the clever hero blinded him with a burning stake, and how the monster's agonizing roars still echoed across the volcanic slopes of Mount Etna. Even as the castaway spoke, they saw Polyphemus himself, a veritable mountain of flesh, shepherding his flocks down to the shore to wash his bleeding eye socket in the waves. Terror, raw and primal, drove them to sea with desperate haste, taking the grateful castaway with them. For what enemy, no matter how great, was too deserving to be abandoned to such a horrifying fate? They rounded Sicily's dangerous coast, staying far from Charybdis's monstrous whirlpool and Scylla's clashing rocks, until at last they reached Drepanum on the island's western shore. Here, in sight of the promised land of Italy, the cruelest blow of all fell upon the weary wanderers. Anchises, their wise counselor and beloved father, the gentle keeper of the sacred Penates and the living memory of their people's greatness, closed his eyes in final, peaceful sleep. No prophecy had prepared the son for this profound, irreplaceable loss. No oracle had warned that he would face his greatest trials alone, without the guiding wisdom that had steered him through 7 long, arduous years of wandering. Part 23. "Here, alas! Here my father, Anchises, my comfort in every misfortune and mishap, deserts me." Worn out, the hero recounted to Queen Dido, his voice breaking with fresh, raw grief. "For this you saved me from so many perils, O best of fathers? Not even the prophet Helenus, though he foretold many terrible things, predicted this sorrow for me. Nor did the dire Celino. This was my last labor. This, the true goal of my long journeying. Departing from there, a power drove me directly to your shores." Thus ended the tale of wandering, but not the pervasive tale of sorrow. For even as the narrator finished his account of 7 years of trials, new griefs were meticulously weaving themselves around his heart and that of his royal hostess, Dido of Carthage, who had listened through the night with growing fascination, found herself irrevocably caught in the intricate web that Venus, the goddess of love, had spun with careful, deliberate artistry. The Queen of Love, seeking to protect her son from Juno's continued wrath and relentless pursuit, had sent young Cupid, cunningly disguised as Iülus, to inflame Dido's heart with an irresistible, consuming passion. Drop by drop, through the long, enchanted evening, love had been distilled into the Phoenician queen's very blood like a sweet, insidious poison, subtly making her forget her solemn vow of eternal faithfulness to her murdered husband, Sychaeus. All that night, Dido lay sleepless, her heart pounding with a new, exhilarating fire. When rosy dawn lifted up the light and scattered the dewy shadows, she turned to her sister Anna with words that openly revealed her profound inner turmoil. "Anna, my sister, what dreams terrify me in my uncertainty? What new guest has entered our house? How noble his bearing! How brave in heart and arms! I believe, and I do not think vainly, that he has descended from the very line of powers, from the gods themselves." Part 24. Anna, seeing her sister's pale complexion and the bright, uncharacteristic light in her eyes, encouraged what she perceived as a promising hope for their kingdom's future. Will you waste away in your lonely grief and never know love's sweet gifts or the joy of children? Do you truly think the buried ashes care? Or the ghost in the grave? Though no one before could move your sorrow, not in Libya nor earlier in Tyre. Though Iarbas was despised, and other chiefs whom Africa, rich in triumphs, breeds, will you resist even a love that pleases? Don't you remember in whose lands you settled? Here Gaetulian cities hem you in. A people unconquerable in war, and unbridled Numidians, and the hostile Sirtes surround you. Here, desert, waterless land, and raiders ranging from Bars. Why mention the wars rising from Tyre and your brother's threats? I think it was by divine will, and with Juno's aid, that the vessels held their course here from Ilium. The sisters' words were like kindling to the burgeoning flame of Dido's passion. They offered hope to her doubting mind and mercifully loosed shame from its restraints. First, they visited the shrines and sought peace, altar by altar. They sacrificed chosen sheep as custom demanded, to Ceres the lawgiver, to Phoebus Apollo, and Father Laius, and above all, to Juno, the guardian of the marriage bond. Most beautiful Dido, holding the paten herself, poured offerings between the horns of a white heifer, or in the presence of the powers. Walked solemnly to rich altars, renewing the day with gifts. And when the sacrificial victims' breasts were opened, she studied the still-breathing organs for signs, desperately seeking affirmation. But the queen's passion grew stronger with feeding. The wound lived beneath her breast, and she was consumed by a hidden, agonizing fire. Part 25. Much she wandered through the bustling city, raging like a wounded deer that some shepherd, hunting in the Cretan woods, has unwittingly struck from a distance with his arrow, leaving the steel irrevocably embedded in her unknowing flesh. She leads the fleet stag over mountain grove, the deadly reed still sticking in her side, a constant torment. Now she conducts the stranger, Aeneas, through the very middle of the walls and proudly shows him the Sidonian wealth and the city, seemingly ready, at hand. She begins to speak, her words flowing freely, and then stops abruptly in the middle of a word, her thoughts consumed by him. Now, as the day is waning, she seeks the same banquets, the very gatherings where he captivated her, and madly asks to hear again the sufferings of the fallen kingdom, and again hangs on the speaker's every word, captivated by his voice and his sorrowful tale. Afterward, when they had parted, and the dim moon, in turn, hid her light, and the setting stars urged sleep, alone in the empty hall, she mourned. She lay on the couch he had left, and though he was absent, she saw him and heard him in her mind's eye. Or she held Iulus on her lap, captivated by his striking likeness to his father, desperately trying to deceive her unspeakable love. The towers, so eagerly begun, no longer rose. The young men no longer practiced arms or toiled at harbors and battlements for safety and war. The great works hung interrupted. The huge, menacing walls and the crane reaching toward the sky, all stood unfinished. Venus, seeing her son seemingly settled in Carthage's luxurious embrace and Dido's growing, consuming passion, spoke to her divine husband, Vulcan, of her profound fears. Part 26. While my son wanders through Tyrian realms and hangs on Dido's seductive lips, I fear what the ultimate outcome of Juno's treacherous hospitality may be. She will not rest idle at such a crucial moment. Therefore, I plan to forestall her with guile and surround the queen with an unquenchable flame of love, so that no divine will can alter her affections. But she may be held fast to me by a great, unyielding love for the wanderer. Yet it was not Venus's wiles, but Jupiter himself who would shatter this idol. Mercury, the wing-footed messenger of the gods, descended with commands that would irrevocably tear apart two hearts already grown into one. Are you now laying the foundations of lofty Carthage, and wife-indulgent, building a beautiful city? Alas, forgetful of your fate in your own realm. The ruler of the powers himself, Jupiter, who turns heaven and earth with his will, sends me down from bright Olympus. He himself commanded me to carry these orders through the swift air. What do you plan? With what empty hope do you waste time in Libyan lands? If no glory of such great deeds stirs you, and you do not undertake the labor for your own praise, look to growing Aeneas and the hopes of Iulus, your heir, to whom are owed the Italian realm and the Roman soil. The divine command struck Aeneas like a bolt of lightning. The exile, jolted from dreams of love and peace, saw his duty clear before him. It was a bitter duty that would cost him the first happiness he had known since his city burned. He must leave Carthage, must abandon Dido, must take his people to Italy. Even if it meant irrevocably breaking the heart that had welcomed him as both lover and king. But how, indeed? To tell a woman who had given him everything that destiny demanded he give her nothing in return? Coward that he was, he prepared his keels in secret, hoping to slip away before confrontation could make the parting unbearable. Part 27. Yet, no preparations, however meticulously hidden, could escape the keen eyes of a lover. Dido's rage when she discovered his treacherous intentions burned hotter than any pyre. Did you hope, traitor, to mask such a monstrous crime and slip silently from my land? Does not our love hold you? Not the solemn pledge once given by your right hand? Not even Dido, about to die a cruel, agonizing death? Do you even work on your armada under the winter star and hurry to traverse the deep in the midst of northern winds? Cruel one! What if you were not seeking foreign fields and unknown homes? An ancient Pergamum still stood? Would a Pergamum still be sought in keels through choppy seas? The hero, bound by an immutable divine command yet tortured by earthly love, could offer only the cold comfort of duty. I do not deny, O Queen, that you deserve endless gratitude, nor will I regret remembering Dido as long as I remember myself. And breath controls these limbs. I will speak briefly of the facts. I did not hope to hide my departure with stealth. Do not imagine that. Nor did I ever hold out the marriage torch or enter this compact. If fate allowed me to guide my life by my own will and settle my cares according to my choice, I would first care for the city of Pergamum and the sweet remains of my people. Priam's lofty home would remain, and I would have refounded the citadel with my hand for the conquered. But now Grynean Apollo and the Lycian oracles have commanded that I seize great Italy. Italy is my love. That is my fatherland. Part 28. Words like winter wind, cold and cutting, struck Dido's heart. The queen's response blazed with the consuming fury of a woman who had offered everything and received only abandonment in return. No goddess was your mother. Nor was Dardanus the true founder of your line, traitor. But the Caucasus, harsh with its hard rocks, bore you, and Hyrcanian tigers nurse you. Why should I hide my feelings? For what greater wrongs should I save myself? Did he sigh at my weeping? Did he turn his eyes? Did he yield, overcome, and shed tears, or pity his wretched lover? What should I say first? No. Now neither great Juno nor the Saturnian father looks on these things with just eyes. Nowhere is trust safe. She called down curses that would echo through the centuries, a terrible legacy. I will follow you with dark fires from afar. And when cold death has separated my limbs from my life, I will be present everywhere as a shade. You will pay, villain! I will hear of it. And the report will reach me in the depths among the shades. The wanderer sailed at dawn, duty-bound but utterly heartbroken. While behind him, Dido prepared the pyre that would be both funeral and a final, defiant message. Upon that altar she placed his sword, his clothes, their marriage bed, everything that reminded her of love tragically turned to betrayal. As the barks disappeared beyond the horizon, she climbed the pyre and drew the blade across her throat. Her last words a poignant mixture of curse and blessing. I have lived and completed the course that fortune gave. And now my great shade will go beneath the earth. I built a glorious city. I saw my own walls rise. I avenged my husband and exacted punishment from my hostile brother. Happy! Alas, too happy! If only the keels from Dardania had never touched our shores! Part 29. Thus ended the love that might have profoundly changed the course of destiny, but destiny itself would not be denied. The flames of Dido's pyre lit the horizon behind the departing convoy. A grim beacon of love tragically transformed to hatred, setting in motion the inexorable chain of enmity that would one day bring Carthage and Rome to mortal, cataclysmic conflict. The captain sailed on toward Italy with the bitter taste of ashes in his mouth, having learned that duty's price is sometimes dearer than any man should be asked to pay. The convoy that departed Carthage carried more than just refugees. It bore the immense weight of broken promises and the smoldering ashes of love turned to hatred. Behind them, Dido's pyre painted the dawn sky crimson, its smoke a final, silent farewell that followed the wanderer's wake across the wine-dark waters. Yet, even as one chapter of sorrow closed, another opened. For the sea itself seemed to mourn the queen's death with storms that drove the survivors towards Sicily's familiar shores. At Drepanum, where Anchises had closed his eyes for the last time, the exile found himself completing a circle of grief. A full year had passed since that bitter loss. And now the anniversary demanded proper honors for the man who had been both guide and comfort through 7 years of wandering. Here, where his father's sacred bones lay buried beneath Sicilian soil, the sun would hold funeral games that would transform private mourning into public celebration. King Acestes himself, a man of blood both Sicilian and Dardanian, welcomed the survivors with kinship's warmth. The old monarch, whose mother had been born beneath Ilium's walls, understood the sacred obligation to honor the dead with contests that would please their shades and bind the living in a fellowship of shared memory. Part 30. 9 days of solemn sacrifice preceded the games themselves. 9 days when the spirits of the departed were called to witness the unwavering devotion of those who remembered them. On the 10th dawn, when Aurora painted the eastern sky with rose-colored light, the trumpet's bronze voice summoned the people to the shore, where glittering prizes awaited in the morning sun, and athletes prepared their bodies for the arduous trials ahead. First came the rowing contest where 4 great warships, Sergestus, Chimera, Centaur, and mighty Scylla, prepared to race around a distant rock where foam marked the turning point. Mnestheus commanded Sergestus with its crew of future Romans. Gyas took Chimera with her 100 oars. Sergestus guided Centaur, while Cloanthus, from whom the Cloentian family would spring, commanded blue Scylla with her racing crew. The starting signal rang across the water, and bronze beaks cut the waves as powerful arms bent to their work. The sea foamed white beneath the oars. Carved by the driving keels as spectators on the shore roared encouragement to their favorites. Gyas held the lead initially, mighty Chimera plowing through the swells. But Cloanthus pressed close behind, his lighter vessel gaining stroke by stroke. At the turning rock, disaster struck the leader. Menides, Gyas's helmsman, cut too close to the stone in his eagerness to maintain advantage. The ship struck with a grinding crash that splintered oars and left her wallowing while the crew struggled to get way on her again. In his fury, Gyas seized the hapless steersman and hurled him into the sea, taking the helm himself to guide his damaged vessel home. Sergestus, seeing his chance, drove Centaur between Gyas and the rock, but pressed too hard in his turn. His bronze beak struck stone with a crash that shattered the ram and snapped off oars like twigs. The crew found themselves stranded on the reef, pulling desperately with broken oar shafts, while their captain cursed the rocks and fate alike. Meanwhile, Mnestheus and Sergestus had found his rhythm, calling on his men for one supreme effort. Now, my comrades, companions of Hector's exile, whom I chose at the last fall of Pergamum. Now show that strength and spirit you displayed in the Gaetulian Syrtis, in Ionian seas, and on Malia's pursuing waves. He drove his vessel past the struggling leaders with a burst of speed that sent spray flying from her bronze-sheathed prow. But Cloanthus had saved his greatest effort for last. Calling upon the sea deities to speed his passage, he felt divine favor fill his sails as Scylla leaped forward like a dolphin racing through blue waters. His vessel crossed the finish line first, winning the olive crown and purple cloak that marked the victor, while his crew received silver cups and talents of bronze for their efforts. Part 31. The foot race followed, where young Nisus led until the final turn when he slipped and blood spilled from the sacrifice and fell. But love for his companion, Euryalus, made him stretch out his leg to trip Salius, the pursuer, allowing his beloved friend to spring ahead and claim the victor's palm. The crowd disputed the result until wise Euryalus shared his prizes, demonstrating the nobility that would soon lead both young men to heroic death. In the boxing match, Dares the champion stood alone upon the sand, his massive frame unmarked by years of victories, challenging any man to face him for the prizes. When none dared answer, old Aeneas suggested the match be declared forfeit. But then rose Entellus, ancient pupil of mighty Eryx, displaying the blood-stained gloves his master once had worn. Gloves weighted with lead and iron that could crush a man's skull with a single blow. The sight of those terrible weapons made even Dares pause until the hero provided softer gloves for both combatants. The fight that followed became legend. Used speed and strength against age's craft and fury. Entellus, slow to anger, fought carefully until Dares landed a blow that awakened the old fire. Then the veteran unleashed such power that the very air whistled with his punches. When he finally dropped Dares with a blow that would have killed him, only the hero's intervention saved the younger fighter's life. The archery contest saw skilled bowmen compete to strike a dove tied to a ship's mast. Hippocon's arrow cut the cord. Mnestheus struck the bird itself. But young Aeneas, shooting at the empty sky, sent forth an arrow that burst into flame as it flew. An omen that caused all to marvel at divine favors shown to the aged king. Last came the Litus Troy, the intricate cavalry display where noble boys on fine horses wove patterns that echoed the labyrinth of Crete. Little Ascanius led one squadron, while Aeneas commanded another, displaying the skills of horsemanship and warfare that would serve them when they came of age. The watching crowd delighted in this image of future glory, seeing in these children the next generation of heroes who would carry Dardanian honor to new triumphs. Part 32. But even as the living celebrated, the dead demanded their solemn due. While the men competed on shore, their women wandered disconsolately among the beach vessels. Their hearts were heavy with years of unrelenting exile and gnawing uncertainty. 7 long years they had followed their leaders across trackless seas, losing home, losing hope, growing old in the relentless wandering, while their children, born into this nomadic existence, slowly forgot the taste of settled life. Juno, ever watchful for an opportunity to strike at Venus's son, sent her swift messenger, Iris, among these mourning wives, disguised as Beroe. The oldest and most respected of the women, the goddess spoke words carefully designed to kindle desperation into an uncontrollable flame. "O wretched ones, whom Achaean hands did not drag to death beneath the walls of your native city! O unhappy race, for what further destruction does fortune save you? It is now the 7th summer since the overthrow of Pergamum, and we traverse all lands and seas, encountering so many inhospitable rocks and stars, while we tirelessly pursue Italy, which flees from us over the vast ocean, and roll over the waves. Here are the lands of our brother Aeneas. Here is true hospitality. What prevents us from founding walls and giving our citizens a permanent city?" The words found fertile ground in hearts worn down by endless wandering. What harm, they reasoned, could there be in finally ending the arduous voyage here, in building new homes on friendly shores among kinfolk who would truly welcome them? Why chase fleeting dreams of a distant Italy when Sicily offered immediate peace and much-needed rest from their labors? Part 33. But settling here was not their divine destiny. And when kind, persuasive words failed to move them, Iris revealed her true divine nature and cast blazing torches among the vessels. The women, maddened by this celestial influence, seized firebrands and hurled them indiscriminately at the ships that had carried them so far, now symbols of their endless plight. Pergo, the eldest of Priam's nurses, was the first to recognize the terrible deception. "This is not Beroe, mothers! This is no mortal woman! See the divine marks! See the blazing eyes! What majesty of bearing, what features! What tone of voice! I myself left Beroe just now, sick and grieving, that she alone could not be present at such an honor, could not pay Anchises his due tribute." The warning, however, came far too late. Already 4 vessels blazed like colossal torches, their pitch-sealed hulls greedily feeding flames that reached hungrily toward heaven. The hero, racing frantically from the games, saw his convoy burning and cried out in anguish. "What new madness is this? Where do you rush, poor citizens? Not against enemies or hostile Achaean camps. It is your own hopes you burn. Look! I am your own offspring." He tore the helmet from his head and hurled it at the flames, but mortal effort could not quench fire kindled by divine wrath. Only when he raised his hands to heaven and called upon his father's spirit did rain begin to fall, sent by Jupiter to save what remained of the vessels. 4 were lost entirely, but the rest were miraculously saved by the sudden deluge that hissed and steamed as it conquered the raging flames. Part 34. Yet the burning of the ships had accomplished Juno's insidious purpose. It planted a deep, gnawing doubt in hearts already weary of endless wandering. Some among the survivors begged to remain in Sicily, to build their new citadel there rather than face more years of uncertainty on dangerous seas. Old Nautes, wisest of counselors, spoke the words that finally resolved the crisis. "Let us follow where the gods lead and where fate unequivocally calls. What the gods give us, that let us follow. Acestes is here, of divine blood. Take him as partner in the enterprise. Make him willing to share these plans." So it was decided. The old, the weak, those whose hearts no longer burned with dreams of greatness would remain in Sicily under Acestes' benevolent rule. They would build Acesta, a city where memories of Ilium could live on in peace, a haven of rest. But the bold, the young, those still hungry for the destiny that had been promised them, would continue the voyage to Italy and the formidable trials that awaited there. On the 7th dawn, after the burning, the reduced convoy set forth once more, leaving behind nearly half their number on Sicily's friendly shores. As they sailed north toward Italy, old Palinurus, the steadfast helmsman, kept faithful watch from Scylla's stern, meticulously reading the stars and the sea's shifting moods, as he had for 7 long years of wandering. But even faithful service could not protect him from divine will. Sleep, sent by Neptune to claim the necessary sacrifice for safe passage, came to him cunningly disguised as Phorbas, speaking words of false comfort. Part 35. Son of Iaseus Palinurus. The false Phorbas murmured, "The very seas themselves carry the vessels. The breezes blow steadily. This is an hour truly given for rest. Lay down your weary head and steel your tired eyes from toil. I myself will take over your duties for a while." The loyal helmsman, ever vigilant, refused to abandon his crucial post. "Do you bid me ignore the face of a calm sea and tranquil waves? Should I trust this deceitful monster, the sea? Why would I entrust the hero to treacherous winds? I, who have been deceived so often by clear skies. But sleep's potent magic proved stronger than any mortal vigilance. The overwhelming drowsiness, sent by divine command, inexorably overcame Palinurus's resistance, and he fell from the stern into the dark waters below, still clutching the helm he had tried so faithfully to hold. His profound loss went unnoticed until dawn revealed the vessel wandering aimlessly, adrift, and without guidance. The hero himself, Aeneas, sorrowfully taking the steering oar, while mourning another loyal friend tragically sacrificed to destiny's relentless demands. As the Italian coast rose majestically from the morning mist, the survivors found themselves approaching Cumae, where ancient mysteries waited in caves sacred to Apollo and his prophetic Sibyl. Here, according to Helenus's precise instructions, lay the gateway to the underworld, the very path by which the living could descend among the shades to learn the profound secrets of fate. The temple that crowned Cumae's heights told its own poignant story in golden relief. How Daedalus, fleeing Crete after the Minotaur's death, had dedicated his wax and wings to Apollo, and painstakingly carved the tale of his own sorrows in the sacred doors. Part 36. Twice the master craftsman, consumed by grief, tried to sculpt his son Icarus falling tragically from the sky. And twice his hands failed him, a father's profound love making art impossible when it touched too closely on his unbearable grief. In the deep cave beneath the temple dwelt the Sibyl, Apollo's ancient priestess, whose cryptic prophecies had guided kings and heroes for centuries beyond counting. When the wanderer Aeneas approached her sacred shrine, she felt the god's powerful presence filling her mortal frame, her voice growing stronger and more resonant as divine power possessed her human form. "Now is the time to ask your fates," she cried, her body convulsing as Apollo's spirit transformed her. "The god! Look, the god!" Her face changed color, her hair stood on end. Her chest heaved with immense power. Her heart swelled with wild fury, and she seemed greater than mortal. Her voice no longer human as the god breathed into her. The hero, awed by the terrifying transformation, made his earnest request. "O Virgin, who alone can pity Troy's great sorrows! You who guide Dardanian remnants through every land and sea and bid them enter Oenotrian fields and wandering cities come to rest, grant that at last our labors find their end. You holy powers, and you most sacred prophetess, foreknower of the future, grant, I ask, no realm not owed me by my fate, that the wanderers may settle in Latium, and the roaming gods and storm-tossed Trojan powers may find rest." But the Sibyl's first response brought warnings, stark and uncompromising, rather than comfort. Part 37. O son of Anchises, seed of divine blood, the Sibyl declared, her voice now resonant with prophetic authority, the descent to Avernus is easy. Night and day the door of dark Dis stands open. But to retrace your steps and escape to the upper air, that is the task. That is the true toil. Few whom just Jupiter loved, or burning virtue raised to heaven, sons of the gods, have achieved it. Yet if he would dare the perilous journey, if he would bravely walk among the shades to meet his father's spirit and learn the full, terrifying scope of what fate truly demanded, there was a way. Hidden deep in the dark woods around Lake Avernus grew a tree that bore a single, luminous branch of gold, sacred to underworld Juno. This golden bough must be plucked by destined hands before any living soul could pass the Stygian waters and return to the realm of the living. If your mind is so resolved, if your desire is twice to swim the Stygian lake, twice to see black Tartarus, and if it pleases you to indulge in such a mad endeavor, hear what must first be accomplished. Hidden in a thick tree is a branch with golden leaves and a pliant stem, said to be sacred to underworld Juno. All the grove conceals it, and deep shadows enclose it in a dark valley. But it is not given to anyone to penetrate the hidden places of the earth before he has plucked the golden-leafed fruit from the tree. Beautiful Proserpina has ordained that this be carried to her, as her own sacred gift. But first, another, immediate duty called. Even as the Sibyl spoke, word came that Maecenas, the herald whose trumpet had summoned them to the funeral games, lay dead upon the shore. The noble musician, who had served both Hector and his current master with equal faithfulness, had arrogantly challenged the sea gods to match his skill in music. Part 38. Triton, jealous of mortal presumption and Maecenas' hubris, had seized him among the rocks and drowned him in the foaming waters. No descent to the underworld could possibly begin, while a comrade lay unburied, his restless spirit wandering homeless between the worlds, unable to find peace. So the entire company, with a shared sense of profound duty, turned to the sacred task of performing proper funeral rites, building a pyre from ancient trees that had grown in the forest since the world was young. Cornel wood and mighty oak, rowan, and pine all fell beneath their axes to create a mountain of timber that would bear their friend's body to the realm of shades. Meanwhile, the hero himself, Aeneas, guided by 2 doves miraculously sent by his divine mother, Venus, ventured into the dark woods around Avernus. Here, where sulphurous vapors rose ominously from the earth, and no bird could fly unharmed, he searched desperately for the golden bough that would grant him passage to the underworld. When Venus's doves, shimmering with celestial light, led him directly to the tree where that sacred branch grew, it came away easily in his destined hands, gleaming like pure gold in the deep forest shadows. Only when Maecenas lay properly burned, his ashes sealed reverently in a bronze urn beneath a barrow that would bear his name through all the ages, could the living finally attempt to walk among the dead. At midnight, when the veil between worlds grew thin, almost translucent, the Sibyl led her chosen companion to the gaping cave mouth that opened onto the eerie path to Hades. Part 39. Now is need of courage, now of a stout heart, the priestess warned, her voice resonating with ancient wisdom as they approached the shadowy, ominous entrance. This far only have you seen men go who had divine blood or whom Jupiter loved, or burning virtue raised to heaven. The descent began through a darkness thick as oil, past terrifying shapes that made mortal hearts quail with pure terror. Here dwelt profound grief and vengeful cares. Here, pale diseases and sad age. Here, primal fear and gnawing hunger that persuades to crime. Here, shameful poverty and implacable death and endless toil. Here, sleep, death's silent brother, and the evil joys of the mind. On the very threshold, grim war, the death dealer, and the iron chambers of the Furies, and mad discord, with blood-stained fillets binding her snaky hair. In the midst stood an enormous elm, ancient and shadowy, where false dreams were said to cling beneath every single leaf. And here were many monstrous forms of various beasts, centaurs and double-formed Scyllas, and the 100-handed Briareus, and the beast of Lerna hissing horribly, and Chimera armed with flame, Gorgons, and Harpies, and the grotesque form of 3-bodied Geryon. At the terrifying sight of these phantoms, the hero instinctively drew his sword. But the Sibyl, calm amidst the spectral chaos, warned him. "Put up your steel, son of Anchises! These are incorporeal forms that flit about, mere shadows without substance. Strike not at emptiness. They came to the river Acheron, whose muddy, swirling waters whirl in a vast quagmire, and pour all their dark sand into Cocytus. Here, grim Charon guards the waters, terrible in his squalor. A mass of white hair lies unkempt on his chin. His eyes glow with an infernal fire. A dirty cloak hangs from his shoulders by a knot. Alone he pulls the boat, and tends the sails and carries the dead in his dark vessel. Old now, but a god's old age is hardy and green, surprisingly vigorous." Part 40. The ancient ferrymen challenged their right to cross. "Whoever you are who approach my stream in arms, tell me now why you come and halt there where you are. This is the region of shadows, of sleep and drowsy night. It is not lawful to carry the living in my Stygian boat." But when the Sibyl, with a serene gesture, displayed the golden bough, the sacred token that compelled obedience, Charon's fury immediately subsided. He marveled at the venerable gift after so long, then turned his blue boat to shore and reverently received them aboard. The shallow craft groaned ominously under the hero's living weight as they crossed the marsh, taking on water through its many chinks until they reached the farther shore. On the other side waited Cerberus, the monstrous 3-headed hound, whose incessant barking fills the underworld with unholy terror. The Sibyl, prepared with a drugged hun cake, hurled the morsel to the monster's triple throat. The guardian of Hades caught the sop in his ravening jaws, and lay down across the entrance, his huge limbs relaxed in profound sleep. Now they walked among the shades themselves, through regions where different types of souls endured their eternal fates. Here were the infants who tragically died at their first breath. Here, those falsely condemned to death by fallible mortal courts. Here, suicides who, in despair, threw away the precious gift of life. Here, warriors who fell bravely in battle. Here, most pitifully, those who died for love. In that last, sorrowful region wandered Dido's shade, her wounds still fresh, like the moon one sees or thinks he sees rising through clouds at the month's beginning. When the hero recognized her ethereal form through the shadows, tears started to his eyes. Part 41. "Unhappy Dido!" he cried, his voice choked with emotion. "So the message that came to me was true? That you had died and sought your fate with the sword? Was I, alas, the cause of death to you? I swear by the stars, by the gods above, by whatever faith there is in the depths of earth, Queen. It was against my will that I left your shores." But the Queen's shade, no more moved by his desperate words than if she were hard flint or Marpesian rock, turned away with hostile, unforgiving eyes, and fled back to the shadowy grove where her first husband, Sychaeus, answered her enduring love with love equal to hers. The hero, profoundly shaken by her unjust fate, followed her departure with tears and pitied her as she went. Beyond the mournful fields lay Tartarus, where the wicked suffered eternal, agonizing punishment, and the Elysian fields, where the blessed dwelt in eternal, serene light. Here in Elysium, among souls preparing for reincarnation in the upper world, the hero found at last the shade he sought. Anchises, his beloved father, standing among green valleys where the spirits of future Romans waited their turn to be born into the world of the living. "Have you come at last?" the old man cried, his spectral voice filled with joy. "And has the loyalty that your father expected conquered the hard journey? Am I allowed to see your face, my son, and to hear and speak in the familiar voice? I was counting the time and calculating when you would come. Nor has my care deceived me. Over what lands and what vast seas have you been driven to reach me? What dangers have beset you, my son?" Father and son tried to embrace 3 times, and 3 times the phantom, grasped in vain, escaped his hands like light breezes, almost like a fleeting, insubstantial dream. Part 42. But love transcends even death's inexorable boundaries. And in that blessed reunion, Anchises revealed the final, glorious purpose of the hero's long, arduous journey. "Come then," the father's shade commanded, his voice filled with a profound sense of destiny. "I will show you your whole destiny, and explain what glory awaits the race of Dardanus. What illustrious Italian children are to come, noble souls that will assume our name." He led his son to a verdant hill from which they could gaze upon the countless spirits waiting to drink from Lethe's river and forget their past lives before returning to flesh. Here were the souls of future heroes: Silvius, who would be born to Lavinia in the woods; the Alban kings, who would rule for 3 centuries; Romulus, who would found Rome and carry her walls to heaven; Augustus himself, son of a god, who would establish a golden age and extend the empire beyond the very paths of the sun. "Others will beat out bronze that breathes more softly," Anchises prophesied, speaking of the Greeks who would excel in art and poetry. "Others will draw living faces from marble. They will plead cases better and trace with a rod the movements of the sky and tell the rising of the stars. You, Roman, remember to rule peoples with your power. These will be your arts. And to impose the habit of peace, to spare the conquered and battle down the proud." Among the future souls, the heroes saw Marcellus, Augustus's nephew, whose early death would tragically rob Rome of a promising leader. The young man's shade moved with regal bearing, but dark shadows surrounded him, foretelling the profound grief that his loss would bring to the emperor who loved him as a son. "Alas! Poor boy!" Aeneas mourned. "If only you could break harsh fate! You will be Marcellus. Give me lilies with full hands. Let me scatter bright flowers and heap these gifts at least upon my descendant's soul and perform an unavailing service." Part 43. The vision of Rome's future glory and sorrow now complete, father and son walked together to the gate of ivory, through which false dreams ascend to the upper world. Here, Anchises sent his son back to the land of the living, enriched with profound knowledge of his own destiny, and the destiny of the mighty race that would spring from his loins. The hero emerged from the underworld as dawn was breaking over Cumae's ancient cliffs. rejoining his faithful companions who had waited patiently through the long night of his descent among the shades. Now he knew the full, immense scope of what fate truly demanded. Not just mere survival, not just the simple founding of a city, but the establishment of a bloodline that would rule the world and bring order to chaos through Roman law and Roman virtue. The arduous wandering was nearly over. Italy lay before them, and with it the inevitable wars that would test every lesson learned through 7 years of relentless exile. But the hero now faced those coming trials with the profound knowledge that they served a purpose far greater than personal survival. That through his sufferings and his victories would be born an empire that would endure for 1,000 years and more. The morning sun painted the Tiber's waters gold as the exiles' convoy, guided by divine providence, finally found the rivermouth that would end 7 long years of wandering. No longer did they need to meticulously read the stars or trust to uncertain winds. The broad, majestic stream that would one day give its name to an empire beckoned them inland toward their promised, tranquil homeland. Part 44. As the vessels turned from salt water to fresh, from the uncertainty of the vast sea to the solid hope of firm land, a white sow miraculously appeared on the river bank with 30 snow-white piglets at her teats. This fulfilled Helenus's precise prophecy, and unmistakably marked the very spot where destiny would plant new roots. Here was Latium, the broad, fertile realm that stretched from the Tiber's mouth to the Alban hills, rich in olive groves and sprawling vineyards, blessed with exceptionally fertile soil that could easily feed a great people. For 3 generations, King Latinus had ruled these peaceful lands, a descendant of the old god Faunus and the nymph Marica, tracing his venerable lineage back to Saturn himself, when that deity ruled the golden age of innocence and plenty. The king was old now, his warrior days long past, governing through wisdom rather than the blunt force of the sword. His greatest sorrow was that he had no son to inherit his throne, for his only child was Lavinia, a maiden of such exquisite beauty that suitors came from every corner of Italy to seek her hand. Among them, Turnus of the Rutulians pressed his claim most ardently, young, handsome, and terrible in battle, supported vehemently by Queen Amida, who favored his suit above all others. But ominous portents had troubled the royal household, signs that spoke clearly of change coming from across the waters. In the sacred laurel tree that grew beside the palace, bees from distant lands had swarmed, hanging in clusters from the ancient branches, while the court soothsayers declared this meant foreign settlers would arrive and rule where the tree grew. Part 45. More disturbing still, Lavinia's hair had inexplicably caught fire as she stood beside her father at a solemn sacrifice, blazing with a harmless, ethereal flame that spoke of future glory. But glory bought with war and immense suffering. When these ominous portents drove Latinus to consult the oracle of Faunus, his divine ancestor, the resonant voice from the holy grove spoke words that chilled the royal heart. "Do not seek to join your daughter in Latin marriage, my son. Do not trust the wedding chamber that is ready. Strangers will come to be your sons-in-law, whose blood will raise our name to the stars, and their descendants will see the whole world turn beneath their feet where the sun looks upon either ocean." The oracle's profound meaning became starkly clear when envoys from the newcomers approached the throne, led by wise Ilioneus, whose silver beard and noble bearing spoke of ancient dignity surviving the hardships of exile. They bore no weapons but carried only olive branches, unmistakable tokens of peace. And their carefully chosen words sought not conquest but a peaceful alliance. "O king," Ilioneus began, his voice respectful, "son of Faunus, no black storm drove us to your lands. No treacherous star or misleading coastline deceived us in our course. By design and willing heart, we have sought this city. Exiled from a realm once the greatest that the sun looked upon as he traveled from heaven's farthest bounds. Our race springs from Jupiter. Dardanian used glory in Jupiter as ancestor. Our king himself is of Jove's highest line, a Trojan wanderer who sends us to your doors." The embassy then proceeded to tell their long, harrowing tale. How divine command had brought them across the waters. How they sought not to conquer but to settle. humbly offering their skills and unwavering loyalty in exchange for a small portion of land where they might build homes and worship their cherished household deities. They had learned the arts of peace as well as war. They could make the wilderness bloom and transform raw earth into rich, productive farmland. Part 46. King Latinus, remembering the oracle's precise words, recognized destiny's undeniable hand in their arrival. These were the foreign sons-in-law that Faunus had foretold. The strangers whose bloodline would inevitably lift his name to the stars. With genuine warmth and regal hospitality, he welcomed the envoys and sent them back to their leader with gifts truly worthy of kings: horses from his royal stables, chariots intricately worked with gold and silver, armor meticulously crafted by divine smiths, and a priceless golden crown that had once adorned his own father's brow. "Tell your leader," he instructed the embassy, his voice firm and clear, "that Latinus does not regret the alliance, and let him not fear to come himself to meet me face to face. It will be the completion of my destiny to join my right hand with his and to fulfill the gods' prophecies. But while mortals meticulously planned for peace, and mortal hatred stirred with malevolent intent to utterly destroy it, Juno, returning from her failed attempt to drown the wanderers in a destructive storm, saw her ancient enemies making triumphant landfall in Italy, and felt her ancient rage kindle anew, a furious inferno. If she could not prevent their arrival, she vowed, she would ensure it brought not peace, but devastating war, not easy settlement, but a brutal conflict that would cost blood and tears beyond counting. "If I cannot bend the powers above," the goddess swore, her voice filled with venom, "I will stir up those below." From the very depths of Tartarus, she summoned Alecto, most terrible of the Furies, whose sole pleasure was in war and treachery, in turning brother against brother, and setting sons against fathers. Even Pluto himself loathed this hideous creature, whose mere presence brought madness and violence wherever she walked. Part 47. The Furies' first insidious target was Queen Amata. Already deeply suspicious of the foreign arrivals and their potentially disruptive impact on her daughter's marriage prospects, disguised as Caleb, an aged priestess of Juno's temple, Alecto whispered poison directly into the queen's unsuspecting ear. "Will you allow Lavinia to be given to Trojan exiles, queen, and have no pity for your daughter or yourself? With the very first wind, the treacherous stranger will sail away to the deep, carrying off the girl as his prize. Did not the Phrygian shepherd Paris come thus to Lacedaemon, and carry Helen away to the cities of Troy? When words alone proved insufficient to ignite the desired frenzy, the Fury, with a malevolent smile, cast one of her venomous serpents directly at the queen's breast, where it cunningly wound itself around her heart, and breathed its potent venom into her blood. The snake became her necklace, twisting itself around her neck. Its cold coils twined in her hair and crept insidiously over her limbs. And while the first poison worked its way subtly through her body with liquid corruption, not yet had her mind caught fire with full, unbridled madness. At first, Amata pleaded with her husband in terms still soft and motherly, weeping openly over her daughter's perceived fate and begging him to reconsider the alliance with foreigners whose very presence, she argued, would inevitably bring war to their peaceful realm. But when Latinus remained unmoved, determined to follow the oracle's clear and undeniable command, the serpent's venom completed its dark work and drove the queen to open, raving madness. She seized Lavinia, her own daughter, and fled with her to the mountains, crying that Bacchus demanded her daughter dance in his honor among the wild women who followed the god of wine and madness. Part 48. Soon she had infected other mothers with her terrifying frenzy, and they raced through the forests with streaming hair, carrying Thyrsi and shouting Bacchus's name, while their abandoned homes grew cold, and their innocent children wept for mothers who no longer recognized them in their madness. But the Fury's greatest, most devastating stroke was yet to come. Disguised as an old woman, Alecto appeared to Turnus as he slept soundly in his palace at Ardea, speaking words carefully designed to inflame the young warrior's pride and ambition to an uncontrollable pitch. Turnus, will you quietly watch all your toil go for nothing? And your rightful crown be given to Dardanian settlers? The king denies you the bride whom your blood earned, and a foreign heir is sought for the kingdom. Go now. Expose yourself to thankless dangers. Go strike down the Tyrrhenian lines. Give peace to the Latins and protection to the conquered. Saturn's daughter herself commanded me to speak these words plainly to you as you lay in quiet night. When Turnus, still half asleep, laughed at these words, mocking the supposed prophet and questioning her sanity, Alecto immediately revealed her true, terrifying form. Her eyes blazed with infernal fire, snakes writhed menacingly in her hair, and twin whips crackled ominously in her hands. She hurled a torch directly at the young prince's breast, lighting there a consuming fire of rage and war lust that would burn relentlessly until death finally quenched it. Turnus woke with blood pounding violently in his veins and only one thought consuming his mind: war against the foreign invaders who dared to claim what was rightfully his. To complete her destructive work, the Fury needed one final spark to ignite the tinder she had so carefully prepared. She found it in young Aeneas, hunting innocently in the royal forests with his Trojan companions, following the sport that had been his delight since childhood. Part 49. The hounds picked up the scent of a magnificent stag. A beast so tame it came readily to its master's call, and so beautiful that Sylvia, daughter of the royal herdsman, had crowned it with garlands and meticulously combed its coat until it shone like bronze. Alecto guided the prince's arrow to wound, but not kill, the noble creature, which fled back to its home, trailing blood and crying piteously for help. Sylvia's screams brought her father and brothers running in alarm. Then the neighboring farmers arrived, armed with whatever improvised weapons they could snatch: pruning hooks, fire-hardened stakes, clubs of seasoned wood. The sudden arrival of Trojan hunters, following their wounded quarry, instantly sparked a violent melee that left blood soaking the forest floor. Almo, the eldest of Tyrrhus' sons, fell first to a Trojan arrow, his throat pierced through so that the voice that had sung so sweetly in the woods was stilled forever. Others followed on both sides as the hunting party quickly escalated into a full-blown battle. Then a running fight that spread through the countryside like wildfire. When news of the bloodshed in his forests finally reached King Latinus, the peace he had so desperately hoped to preserve was already dying, irrevocably shattered. Her work complete, Alecto returned to her mistress Juno with words of triumph. "Look! I have perfected discord and war for you. Now tell them to join in friendship and make treaties. Since I have stained the Ausonians with Trojan blood, I will add this too. If you give me certain permission, I will draw neighboring cities into war with rumors and kindle their hearts with mad desire for conflict so that they come from every side as allies. I will sow the fields with war." Part 50. But Juno, seeing how quickly peace had turned to unbridled violence, dismissed the Fury with words that revealed even her own horror at what had been unleashed. "Enough of terror! The causes of conflict are firmly established. They fight hand to hand. Fresh blood stains the weapons that chance first put in their hands. Let such be the union, such the wedding that the glorious son of Venus and King Latinus himself celebrate. The Father who rules high Olympus would not wish you to wander too freely in the upper air. Withdraw if any further trouble remains. I myself will manage it." As war fever spread through Latium like a plague, men who had lived their lives in peace suddenly remembered the heavy, forgotten weight of weapons in their hands. From every city came the ominous sound of forge fires being rekindled and swords being hammered from plowshares, a grim exchange. The poet's voice grows heavy, almost sorrowful, as he catalogues the heroes who would inevitably die in the brutal fighting: Messapus, tamer of horses; Mezentius, the priest-killer, with his devoted son, Lausus; fierce Camilla, the Amazon of the Volscians; and above all, Turnus, magnificent in his shining armor, terrible in his rage, the very flower of Italian youth, who would learn too late that some prizes exact too high a price. King Latinus, seeing his peaceful realm dissolve into madness despite his fervent efforts at peace. Shut himself in his palace, and would take no part in the frenzied preparations for war. Like a massive, immovable rock that withstands the fury of wind and wave while lesser stones are swept away, he endured the storm of conflicting demands and remained utterly unmoved. Since he could not control events, he would not be their instrument. Part 51. Meanwhile, the stranger who had unknowingly sparked this devastating conflict felt his own world shifting precariously beneath his feet. The warm welcome he had initially received now seemed like a distant dream as reports reached him of violence spreading uncontrollably through the countryside, of armies gathering with grim determination to drive the newcomers back into the sea from which they had come. Once again, as at Carthage, love and duty warred fiercely within his heart. The love of peace and settled life against the undeniable duty to defend his people and claim the destiny that heaven had promised them. In his profound distress, he sought guidance from the river god Tiberinus, whose ancient waters had brought them to this promised but now troubled land. As he lay sleeping on the Tiber's bank, the benevolent deity appeared to him in the form of an aged man, gray-bearded and crowned with reeds, whose voice carried the immense authority of centuries. O offspring of divine race! The river god spoke, his voice deep and resonant. You who bring back to us Troy city from its enemies and preserve eternal Pergamum, long awaited on Laurentine fields and Latin soil. Here is your certain home. Here your certain household gods. Do not retreat and do not be terrified by threats of war. All the swelling anger of the gods has subsided. To prove his words were truth and not mere dream, Tiberinus promised a tangible sign. In order that you may not think these are empty images of sleep, you will find a huge white sow lying under the oaks by the bank with 30 newborn offspring lying around her teats. White lying on the ground, white young around her udders. That place will be your city, that certain rest from your labors. Part 52. But the god also brought crucial counsel for the formidable trials ahead. Upriver lived Evander, an Arcadian king who had led his people to settle on the hills beside the Tiber. These Greeks, ancient enemies of the Latins in old feuds, would prove natural allies for the newcomers, their common adversaries uniting them. More than that, they commanded the very site where Rome herself would one day rise in unparalleled glory. Rise then, Tiberinus commanded, his voice firm. And as Aurora rises, pray properly to Juno, and overcome her wrath and threats with your prayers and vows. You will pay me honor when you are victorious. Following the river god's sagacious counsel, the heroes selected 2 vessels and their bravest crews for the journey upriver to seek alliance with Evander. As they rowed against the current, the forest grew thick and ancient on either side until they reached the place where 7 hills would one day bear the immense weight of the world's greatest city. Now it was only pastoral countryside where shepherds grazed their flocks and farmers worked small plots of grain. They found the Arcadians celebrating the festival of Hercules at the Era Maxima, the great altar where the hero god had received sacrifice after slaying the monstrous Cacus in these very hills. King Evander himself, though aged and white-haired, led the rituals that honored the deity who had cleansed their land of the fire-breathing giant who had terrorized the region. When the foreigners approached with olive branches, symbolic of peace, and peaceful words, young Pallas, the king's beloved son, stepped forward to challenge them before they could interrupt the sacred rites. Part 53. But his father, wise in the intricate ways of divine providence, immediately recognized the inherent nobility in their bearing and the profound destiny seemingly written in their faces. Young men, what cause has driven you to explore unknown paths? He asked, his voice calm and authoritative. What do you seek? What is your race? Where is your home? Do you bring peace or war? The reply came not from the hero, Aeneas, directly, but from his heart, as he saw in the aged king a father's love that intimately echoed his own recent, painful loss. Our race is Trojan. Our arms hostile to the Latins, and we seek you, fugitives, involuntary exiles. We ask for alliance. We are that same race. Perhaps fame has carried our name to you. Whom treacherous Diomedes sought to capture with war. Whom he attacked with unprovoked aggression. We left Asia and approached Europe's shores. Exiled by Diomedes' might and by the fortune that conquers all. Evander's response revealed the complex, interwoven web of ancient kinship that subtly bound the Mediterranean world. Oh, bravest of the Trojan race, how gladly I recognize you and recall the voice and face and weapons of great Anchises. For I remember how Priam came to visit his sister Hesiane's kingdom, and to see Salamis, and then passed through our cold Arcadia. Then early youth was clothing my cheeks with down. And I marveled at the Trojan leaders and marveled at Laomedon's son, but Anchises walked above them all, a figure of immense dignity. My young heart burned with desire to address the hero and join my right hand to his. I approached and led him eagerly to Pheres' walls. As he departed, he gave me a wonderful quiver and Lycian arrows, a cloak woven with gold, and the 2 golden bits that now my palace has. Part 54. So kinship and honor, ancient and profound, joined hands across the vast span of years, and the alliance was solemnly sealed before the sacred altar where Hercules had received his due. That evening, as wine flowed freely and stories were warmly shared, Evander told the harrowing tale of Cacus, the fire-breathing son of Vulcan, who had terrorized the region until Hercules came and strangled him in his dark cave, leaving the land finally free for peaceful settlement. But it was the next morning that brought the greatest, most profound revelation. Leading his guest, Aeneas, to the summit of the Tarpeian rock, where shepherds' huts now stood scattered among ancient oak groves, Evander spoke words that sent shivers through the hero's very soul. This grove, this hill with its leafy crown, some god inhabits. Which god we are uncertain. My Arcadians believe they have often seen Jove himself here when he shook the dark aegis in his right hand and gathered storm clouds. Moreover, you see these 2 towns with walls thrown down. These are monuments and relics of ancient men. Father Janus founded this fort. Saturn that one. The name of this was Juniculum, of that Satina. Here was the future site of Rome, where his descendants would one day build the eternal city that would rule the world. The hills that seemed so peaceful now would one day echo with the tramp of legions, the roar of crowds in the Circus Maximus, the fervent debates of senators in the Curia. What seemed like rustic simplicity was, in fact, destiny meticulously preparing its grand stage. As they walked through what would become the Roman Forum, where cattle now grazed idly among the reeds, Evander pointed out landmarks that would forever bear immortal names. Here, where you see scattered huts and demolished roofs, once were cities. This Janus built, that Saturn. The name of this was Juniculum, of that Satina. Part 55. That night, as the hero Aeneas slept in Evander's simple, rustic palace, Venus came to her divine husband, Vulcan, with a crucial request that would arm her son for the formidable trials ahead. In the god's colossal forge beneath Mount Etna, where the Cyclopes labored eternally at their roaring anvils, the smith god began crafting magnificent armor that would tell the epic story of Rome's future glory. The centerpiece of this divine panoply was a shield whose bronze surface became a vast canvas for depicting the profound destiny that awaited the hero's line. There was Romulus suckling at the she-wolf's teeth, a primal image of Rome's ferocious beginnings. There were the infamous rape of the Sabine women and the fierce wars that followed, demonstrating the city's early struggles and growth. There was Menes Fuficius, the treacherous Alban dictator, torn apart by horses for breaking treaty, a stern warning against betrayal. There was Porsenna, the Etruscan king, demanding the return of the exiled Tarquin, showcasing Rome's resilience against external threats. There was Horatius bravely defending the bridge and Cloelia escaping across the Tiber, symbols of individual heroism. At the shield's very center blazed the climactic battle of Actium, where Augustus would decisively defeat Antony and Cleopatra to become the sole ruler of the Roman world. Apollo himself was shown bending his bow above the tumultuous battle, while the defeated forces fled in disarray toward the Nile's mouth. And Rome celebrated triumph over the forces of chaos and Oriental despotism. Part 56. The shield's outer rim masterfully depicted Augustus receiving tribute from conquered nations. The Mauritians and the Dahi, Africans and Indians, all bringing their immense wealth to honor the prince who had brought an enduring peace to the world after generations of brutal civil war. It was a grand vision of an empire that would span continents and endure for centuries, all springing from the exile's unwavering willingness to fight for his destined homeland. When Aurora's rosy fingers delicately lit the sky, Evander led his guests to the sacred place where the divine armor waited, wrought by immortal hands and blazing with prophetic scenes. "Take these gifts," the old king urged, his voice filled with gravitas, "which my divine kinsman sends, and do not hesitate to trust them in the crisis. These weapons will not dishonor you." Neither the threats of proud Turnus, nor the boastful Latins. As the hero lifted the shield and felt its immense weight, he was, in that profound moment, lifting the destiny of Rome itself. The immense burden and the unparalleled glory of an empire that would rest on his shoulders and those of his descendants. The cost of that glory would be measured in blood, his own people's blood. His enemies' blood, the blood of innocent farmers who wanted only to tend their fields in peace. But destiny, once accepted, relentlessly demands its price. And that price would be paid in the brutal battles to come. Armed with Vulcan's celestial gifts and strengthened by Evander's crucial alliance, the hero prepared to return to his people and lead them in the war that would decide whether Troy's remnant would find new life or perish forever on Italian soil. Part 57. The hero's absence would prove more costly than any defeat in open battle. While he sailed upriver seeking alliance with Evander, the storm of war that Alecto had so maliciously kindled broke over his undefended camp like a hurricane of bronze and fire. Turnus, maddened by the Furies' torch and seeing a golden opportunity in his rival's departure, gathered the very flower of Italian youth and led them against the wooden walls where the exile's people waited like sheep penned for slaughter. From every corner of Latium they came, Mezentius, the Etruscan tyrant, with his devoted son Lausus, Messapus, son of Neptune, terrible on his war-horse, Camilla, the Volscian maiden whose feet could run across wheat fields without bending a stalk, across wave-tops without wetting her sawls. They brought with them the ancient fury of the earth itself, the rage of people who would not be displaced by foreign dreams. The camp that had sheltered the wanderers through 7 years of exile now became a fortress under relentless siege. The hero had left strict orders before departing. If attacked, his people should defend the walls, but under no circumstances venture forth to meet the enemy in open combat. Better to trust in timber and earth than risk everything on the uncertain chances of battle. The walls, he believed, would hold until his return with Evander's warriors and the divine armor that Vulcan was forging in his mountain smithy. But young hearts burn with a different fire than wisdom counsels. Among the defenders stood Nisus and Euryalus, whose names would echo through the centuries as eternal symbols of perfect friendship and heroic folly. Part 58. Nisus was the elder, a seasoned warrior whose skill with the javelin had won him fame in the funeral games. Euryalus bloomed with the radiant beauty of youth, just touching manhood. His cheeks were still smooth, his courage as yet untested, but burning bright as any veteran's. Love bound these two beyond the bonds of mere comradeship, a love pure and fierce as fire, ready to sacrifice everything for the beloved's sake. When they saw their people trapped behind walls like cattle awaiting slaughter, when they heard the enemy's arrogant boasts and saw the watch-fires burning ominously on the plain, their hearts could not endure the shame of passive waiting. Euryalus, Nisus whispered as they stood guard in the quiet night, "Do the gods put this fire in our minds? Or does each man's mad desire become his god? Long has my heart yearned to rouse up battle or some great deed and is not content with quiet peace. You see what confidence fills the Rutulians. Their lights are scattered, relaxed in sleep and wine. They lie quiet, silence holds all the wide place. Learn then what I ponder, what thought rises in my mind. Elders and people, all demand that our chief be summoned and men be sent to carry him certain news. If they promise what I ask for you, for the glory of the deed is reward enough for me. I think I can find a path below that hill to the walls and towers of Pallanteum. The plan was desperate beyond measure, to slip through the enemy lines in darkness, cross 20 miles of hostile territory, and reach the hero with news of the siege. The chances of success were slim, the chances of survival slimmer still. But the thought of their leader returning to find his people massacred drove them beyond the bounds of prudent calculation. Part 59. Euryalus, his young heart ablaze with visions of glory, begged to share the immense danger. Do you refuse to take me with you into such great deeds, Nisus? Shall I send you alone into such perils? Not thus did my warrior father Ophelts rear and teach me amid Achaean terrors and Troy's troubles. Nor thus have I borne myself with you while following great-hearted Aeneas and his uttermost fates. Here is a heart that scorns the light of life and thinks that honor which you aim at well bought with life. Their comrades, waking to find the two young men preparing for departure, tried desperately to dissuade them. Old Aeneas wept as he spoke, his voice filled with foreboding. O gods who rule over souls, under whose empire Troy stands! You do not yet utterly purpose to destroy the Trojan race when you have brought young hearts of such valor and minds so firm. But the young men's resolution could not be shaken, and at last their elders gave reluctant blessing to the perilous enterprise. Aeneas, though barely more than a boy himself, understood the heroism being offered and made promises that revealed a wisdom far beyond his tender years. All I have hangs on fortune's return, and in him lies my trust and solace. I call to witness my father's shade and the divine powers of the household. What good fortune returns to me by your coming? That same I deliver to you both. Restore me my father! Bring him back to sight. Nothing can be sorrowful when he is regained. I will give 2 silver cups rough with gold, which my father took when he captured Arisba, 2 tripods, 2 great talents of gold, and an ancient wine bowl which Sidonian Dido gave. Part 60. Into the perilous night they went, past the sleeping guards, beyond the camp's protective walls, out into the oppressive darkness where death waited with patient, hungry jaws. The enemy lay scattered across the plain, drunk with their premature victory and copious wine, confident that the morning would bring easy slaughter of the trapped foreigners. They had not posted proper watches, and their sentries dozed at their posts, making the young warriors' passage seem guided by the gods themselves. But success, born from such recklessness, bred the overconfidence that ultimately destroys heroes. Moving through the sleeping camp like angels of death, they began killing the helpless enemies, not from sheer necessity, but from the intoxicating joy of slaughter. The heady rush of power over helpless foes. Rames the prophet died in his sleep. Remus and his 3 servants, Lemyrus and Lemyrus. Young Serenus, who had played at dice until late and lay overcome with wine. O Euryalus, Nisus whispered as they moved through the carnage. Shall we make our way through the foe? This is our path, lest any force come against us. Do you keep watch far around and look out? I will devastate here and carve a wide path and guide you through. The killing might have gone on until dawn, but fatal beauty proved their downfall. Among the slain lay Rames's gear, a sword belt intricately worked with gold, a helmet that gleamed like captured starlight. Euryalus, his young heart dazzled by such splendor, buckled on the belt and set the shining helm upon his head, not thinking that in darkness any brightness, however faint, makes a target. Part 61. They had nearly reached safety when a troop of Latin horsemen, riding late from Alba Longa with messages for Turnus, spotted the glimmer of moonlight on bronze. Volscens, their captain, called out across the darkness. Halt! Warriors! What cause brings you on the road? Who are you in arms? Where do you go? When no answer came, Save the sound of feet fleeing swiftly toward the forest, he knew he had found enemies. The chase that followed would haunt Roman memory forever after. Through dark, tangled woods they ran, the older man desperately trying to shield his beloved friend. The younger was slowed by the very spoils that had tempted him to his doom. Branches caught at the gleaming helmet. Roots tripped unwary feet, and behind them came the hunters with torches and swords, closing the gap with every stride. When the circle finally closed around them in a forest clearing, Nisus had escaped. But Euryalus was caught, held fast by enemies whose eyes burned with the fury of men who had found their comrades butchered in their sleep. No mercy would be shown to such killers. No quarter given to those who murdered sleeping men. "Stop!" Nisus cried, crashing back through the undergrowth with javelin raised. "Here I am, I who did it! Turn all your steel on me, O Rutulians! The wrong is all mine. He dared nothing, could do nothing. I call the sky to witness, and the stars that know all things. He only loved his unhappy friend too well. But words, however heartfelt, could not turn aside the blade that Volscens drove between Euryalus' ribs, the steel that drank the lifeblood of youth and beauty. With a cry that seemed to tear the night in half, Nisus hurled his javelin with such force that it pierced Volscens from back to breast, then fell upon his friend's body as the other Latins rushed in with swords. Part 62. So died the most beautiful friendship that ever graced the earth, cut short by the iron necessity of war, destroyed by the very courage that made it glorious. Their heads, grotesquely mounted on spears, were carried back to taunt the besieged camp. And their mothers' wails rose to heaven like accusations against the gods who permit such waste of noble hearts. The sight of those beloved faces, transformed by death into objects of horror, drove the defenders to such a frenzy that they burst from their gates despite orders, desperate to avenge their comrades or die in the attempt. The battle that followed raged around the walls like a tide of bronze and fire, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage until Turnus himself appeared, magnificent in his armor, terrible in his rage. Like a wolf among sheep, the Rutulian prince moved through the combat, his sword drinking blood with every stroke. He struck down Antiphates, bastard son of Sarpedon. He slew young Muranus against his father's desperate prayers. He cut down Eremus and Idmon and Bishes, huge warriors whose strength had been their pride until Turnus proved that skill matters more than sheer size. But it was the ship burning that truly showed the enemy's desperation and divine protection's power. Turnus, seeing the wooden vessels drawn up on the beach like sleeping beasts, seized a torch and called upon his men to complete their victory by destroying the means of escape. Let the foreigners learn that there would be no retreat from this shore, no flight across the waters to try their luck elsewhere. As the first flames licked at seasoned timber, a miracle stayed their destructive work. These ships had been built from trees sacred to Cybele, the great mother goddess, cut from her holy groves on Mount Ida with the goddess's reluctant permission. Part 63. Now, seeing her sacred wood threatened with destruction, she called upon Jupiter to honor his ancient promise. "Grant me this, dear son," the mother of the gods pleaded, "which your love denies not. Let me not be allowed to see my fleet conquered by any war, swept away by flames. Let the fortunate time aid them, since they carried the sacred things of Troy." The answer came with thunder that shook earth and sky, with rain that fell like the tears of heaven, with winds that howled across the battlefield as the voice of offended divinity. Before the amazed eyes of both armies, the ships began to change, not burning, but miraculously transforming, their wooden hulls becoming flesh, their carved prows growing into heads, their oars into swimming limbs. 20 sea nymphs rose from the Tiber's waters, where 20 vessels had floated moments before, beautiful daughters of the sea who laughed as they swam away from mortal conflict toward deeper waters. The sight struck terror into Italian hearts, but filled the defenders with new hope. Surely gods who could work such wonders would not abandon their chosen people to destruction. The battle continued with fresh fury. But now both sides fought with the knowledge that heaven itself was watching, that this conflict would decide more than the fate of a single people. As night fell, exhaustion and the profound memory of divine intervention brought a brief respite. But with dawn would come fresh horror. For the hero's return with allied forces would spark battles that would drench Italian soil with blood and decide whether Troy's remnant would find new life or perish forever on these foreign shores. In his tent, Turnus sharpened his weapons and meticulously planned the next day's assault. While across the plain, the defenders counted their dead and prayed for their leader's swift return. Part 64. Neither side could truly imagine the greater tragedy approaching, that when the hero did return, when the battle was joined in earnest, the very flower of both peoples would fall like grain before the reaper's blade. The night passed slowly, marked by the groans of wounded men and the tears of women who had lost sons and husbands in a quarrel they barely understood. In a few hours, Aurora would lift her rosy light over scenes of carnage that would make this day's killing seem like mere children's games. The real war was about to begin. And with it would come losses that would shadow even victory with profound mourning. Young Aeneas, keeping watch from the highest tower, saw the enemy fires stretching across the plain like fallen stars, and whispered prayers to his father's shade. Soon, very soon, he would learn the true price of the destiny that heaven had laid upon his house. A price that would be measured not just in his own people's blood, but in the blood of brave enemies whose only crime was loving their homeland too well to surrender it without a fight. War had come to Latium, and war would take its relentless toll from every house, every heart, every hope that mortals cherish. The gods had set the stage. Now mortal actors would play out the tragedy to its bitter but necessary end, knowing that from such suffering would be born an empire that would bring order to a chaotic world, but at a cost that only the gods themselves could justify. Dawn broke over a battlefield where the young and brave lay twisted in death's embrace, their beauty transformed to horror, their dreams of glory ended in pools of blood that would nourish alien soil. Part 65. The Trojan chief stood among the carnage, his divine armor gleaming like captured sunlight, but his heart heavy with a grief that no victory could lighten. Before him lay Pallas, Evander's beloved son, struck down by the Rutulian prince in his very first taste of battle, the golden belt of his slayer glittering obscenely around the young warrior's waist. Here was the price of fate made manifest, not just an enemy dead whose courage he could honor, even as he mourned their necessity, but in the death of innocence, of youth that should have lived to see the peace that this war would ultimately buy. Pallas had followed him to battle with a boy's eager enthusiasm and a champion's valiant heart, seeking glory beside the man who had become a second father to him. Now he would return to Evander as cold flesh, another offering on heaven's bloody altar. The wondering captain's tears fell like rain as he spoke over the young man's body. Poor boy! When joyous fortune came, she grudged you this gift to see my kingdom and return victorious to your father's house. This was not the promise I gave about you to your father Evander when he embraced me as I left, and sent me to win a great empire, and anxiously warned me that the men were fierce, and the race was hard in battle. And now he perhaps, held fast by empty hope, is making vows and loading altars with gifts, while we escort his lifeless son with unavailing honor. He who now owes nothing to any god. The funeral cortege that bore Pallas home was magnificent and terrible. 1,000 chosen warriors escorting the bier. Etruscan nobles and Arcadian fighters walking with reversed spears. Riderless horses that had carried the youth to his last battle. Part 66. But no display of honor, however grand, could ease the devastating blow that awaited his father. No ceremony, however solemn, could restore the light to eyes that had looked on their only son's face for the very last time. At Pallanteum, King Evander waited with the agonizing hope that tortures parents, whose children have gone to war. When he saw the procession approaching in funeral array, when he recognized the still form on the bier, his cry of anguish echoed from the 7 hills like the voice of the earth itself mourning its children. This is not the return you promised me, my son! The old king wailed as he embraced the cold body. Was I too confident in entrusting you to the Dardan prince? Was my fatherly love stronger than caution? Yet this death in battle is no disgrace. No wound from a coward's flight stains you. You fell facing the foe, struck down as you advanced. I would not wish you to live unmanningly, nor should you have sought safety through shame. The sight of such profound grief, of love tragically transformed to unbearable loss, hardened something in the scion of Venus's heart that had been wavering. Mercy was a luxury that war could not afford. Honor to brave enemies was a noble sentiment that the dead could not truly appreciate. When next he met the enemy champion, when he saw that golden belt that had been torn from Pallas's dying body, there would be no room for clemency. No space for the gentleness that peacetime allowed. But the war's momentum carried all before it like a river in flood. Attempts at negotiation, at finding some middle ground between foreign settlement and native resistance, foundered on the simple, immutable fact that neither side could truly trust the other's promises. Part 67. King Latinus, weary beyond measure of the bloodshed, proposed single combat between the champions to decide the issue without further slaughter of innocent men. Too long have we fought this war at our common cost, the old king declared to his assembled nobles. If we must decide our fate by war, and I see no other course that the Rutulian will accept, let the combat be between 2 men alone, not thousands. Let the enemy champions meet in single fight, and let the winner take both kingdom and bride. The rest of us have shed enough blood for decisions that rulers should make. The proposal might have found acceptance if divine intervention had not shattered the fragile hope of limiting the carnage. Juno, seeing her champion's cause wavering, sent her sister Juturna to stir the Rutulians to fresh violence. Disguised as the warrior Camers, the river goddess moved among the troops, whispering doubts about their leader's wisdom in accepting single combat with a warrior who bore divine armor and enjoyed heaven's clear protection. "Are you not ashamed?" she challenged them, her voice filled with feigned indignation. "To offer one life for all these thousands? Are we unequal in number and strength? Here are all the exiles and Arcadians. Here are Etruscans, hostile to our prince. Scarcely will half of them have opponents if we all fight. He will rise in fame to the gods whose altars he devotes himself upon, and he will live on the lips of men. But we, robbed of our native land, will obey proud masters. We who now sit idly on the field." The inflammatory words found eager ears among warriors who had seen their comrades die and wanted revenge. Not some bloodless resolution that might cheat them of vengeance. Part 68. When an ominous portent appeared, an eagle seizing a swan, but then being mobbed by smaller birds until it dropped its prey, the augur Tolumnius interpreted it as a sign that the many could indeed overcome the mighty through united effort. The very first spear that shattered the fragile truce came from Tolumnius himself, striking down 9 brothers who had stood together among the Arcadian ranks. The sight of their blood immediately rekindled all the fury that diplomacy had barely contained. And once more, the armies rushed together in that deadly embrace where bronze finds flesh. And young men learned the final, brutal lesson that war teaches. But this renewed fighting brought fresh horror with the tragic death of Camilla, the warrior maiden who had ridden to battle like Diana herself, beautiful and terrible in her virgin wrath. She had led the Volscian cavalry with a skill that made veteran warriors marvel, her javelin never missing its mark, her horse responding to her will as if they shared a single mind. The poet's voice grows tender, almost sorrowful, as he tells of her last fight. How she pursued Clorius, an exiled priest whose armor gleamed with gold and purple, thinking to dedicate his spoils in Diana's temple. But as she pressed her relentless pursuit, focusing solely on the prize rather than the inherent danger, Aruns the hunter found his chance, and drove his spear between her ribs. As life flowed out with her blood, Camilla spoke her final words to her dearest companion, Acca. "Thus far, Acca, my sister, I could do. Now the bitter wound conquers me, and all around me grows dark with shadows. Escape and carry to our leader my last commands. Let him take up the fight and keep the foreigners from the city. And now, farewell. Part 69. Diana's profound grief for her beloved huntress shook the very heavens. And the goddess sent Opus, swiftest of her nymphs, to exact vengeance on the slayer. Aeneas, thinking himself safe in distant concealment, felt the arrow pierce his heart, and died alone among the mountains, his triumph lasting only moments longer than his victim's agony. With Camilla's death, the last hope of Italian victory in the open field died, too. The Rutulian commander, Turnus, receiving word that his cavalry was broken and the enemy approaching the city walls, felt the immense weight of doom closing around him, like the suffocating coils of fate itself. No more could he delay the single combat that both honor and grim necessity demanded. No more could he hope that others might win the victory that his pride had made inevitable. The morning of the final duel dawned clear and bright, as if the gods themselves wished perfect visibility for the tragedy they had ordained. In the space between the armies, meticulously marked out like an arena for gladiatorial games, two champions would settle what thousands had died failing to resolve. The prize was a kingdom, a bride, the very future of two races. But the cost would be measured in more than the winner's triumph. The young Rutulian came to the field, magnificent in his bronze armor, his sword bright as captured fire, his shield bearing the image of Io transformed into a heifer by jealous Juno's wrath. He moved with the deadly grace of a lion that has sighted its prey, beautiful in his pride, terrible in his certainty that this day would crown him with glory, or grant the warrior's death that was better than shameful defeat. His opponent bore the divine armor that Vulcan had forged, the shield that showed Rome's future glory blazing on its bronze surface. Part 70. But beneath that celestial protection beat a heart heavy with the profound knowledge of what this moment would truly cost, not just his enemy's life, which honor demanded, but his own transformation from a man seeking peace into an unwilling instrument of heaven's harsh will. The terms were simple and terrible in their finality. Single combat to the death, with no intervention from gods or men. No mercy for the defeated. No quarter given or expected. The winner would take Lavinia as his bride and rule Latium as its king. The loser would pay with his life for the presumption of challenging the appointed course. As they faced each other across the measured ground, both men knew they were playing out a drama written by powers beyond their understanding. This was not merely personal rivalry, but the cataclysmic collision of two destinies, one that must triumph, one that must die, so that the future could be born from the ashes of the past. King Latinus spoke the ritual words that bound both champions to their grim doom. Let the gods be witnesses to these agreements and this covenant. If victory falls to our prince, the exiles defeated will withdraw to Evander's city, and Iulus will leave these fields. Nor shall the race of the wanderer ever return in war to trouble this realm. But if victory grants the fight to our guest, as I rather think, and rather wish the gods would will it so, I will not command Italians to obey foreigners, nor do I seek kingdoms for myself. Let both races, unconquered, join under equal laws and everlasting treaty. The combat began with the ritual exchange of spears, both warriors testing each other's guard, meticulously measuring the distance and timing that would determine life or death. They circled like wolves seeking advantage, their shields catching the morning sun, their breathing harsh in the sudden, tense silence that had fallen over both armies. Part 71. Then the Rutulian struck first, his spear driving toward his opponent's breast with all the fury of a man fighting for everything he held dear. But the divine armor turned aside the bronze point, and the weapon shattered against celestial protection, like mortal hope against heaven's immutable design. The Trojan captain's return cast was true. His spear driven with the strength of one who fought not for personal glory, but for the destiny of unborn generations. The point found its mark in his enemy's thigh, sending the Rutulian champion to his knees as blood flowed bright across the green grass. Wounded but not yet beaten, The young warrior fought on with the desperate courage of one who knows he faces his final hour. His sword rose and fell like lightning. But each blow that should have found flesh met only the impenetrable protection that heaven had provided. Meanwhile, his opponent pressed the attack with remorseless efficiency, driving the younger man back step by step toward the moment when courage would no longer suffice. The end came suddenly, as ends always do in battle. The Rutulian stumbled over a stone, placed there, some said by angry gods who would no longer tolerate resistance to their will, and fell backward, his guard open, his death certain. The exile's blade rose for the killing stroke. And in that moment, their eyes met across the gulf that separates the living from the dying. "I am beaten," the fallen champion whispered, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. "The Ausonians have seen me stretch out my hands in defeat. Lavinia is your wife. Do not extend your hatred further." Part 72. For a single heartbeat, the conqueror hesitated. Here was a brave enemy offering submission. A young man whose only crime had been loving his homeland too much to surrender it without a fight. Mercy whispered that enough blood had been shed, that magnanimity would honor both victor and vanquished. But then the Dardan prince's gaze fell upon the golden belt that circled his enemy's waist, Pallas's belt, torn from the young man's body as he lay dying, worn now like a trophy by his killer. In that moment, the memory of Evander's grief blazed up like fire, and Mercy died before the altar of vengeance. "You appealed to me, wearing the spoils stripped from my people?" The words came cold as winter wind, implacable as the appointed course itself. "Pallas strikes this blow. Pallas sacrifices you and exacts payment with your guilty blood." The sword drove home with all the force of heaven's design behind it, piercing heart and hope together. The Rutulian's life fled indignant to the shades below, leaving behind only the empty shell of what had been the flower of Italian youth, the pride of his people, the last champion of a race who would now learn to call foreigners their masters. So ended the war that had raged across Latium like a fever, leaving the land scarred with graves and watered with tears. The scion of Venus stood alone on the field where so many brave men had died, feeling not triumph, but the terrible weight of the crown that heaven's design had placed upon his brow. He had won a kingdom, but the price of that victory would haunt him to his final day. Part 73. The surviving Italians, seeing their champion dead, laid down their weapons and acknowledged defeat. The age of resistance was over. The age of Roman rule had begun. But the cost had been so high, the suffering so great, that even the winners would remember this day with sorrow rather than celebration. As the young warrior's soul fled to the underworld, the poet's voice follows it with something like mourning, a lament for the waste of noble life that the appointed course demands as the price of its grand designs. The fallen champion had died as warriors die, facing his lot with courage even when hope was gone. He deserved a better end than this, a gentler doom than becoming a stepping stone for another's glory. But heaven's design is deaf to human wishes, blind to human tears. What must be will be, and the price will be paid by whoever stands in the path of divine will. The new age was dawning, but it rose from the ashes of the old, and its light was stained with the blood of all who had died, resisting changes they could not prevent and could not understand. The blood of the fallen prince had barely dried upon Italian soil when silence fell across the battlefield. Not the quiet of peace, but the hushed awe of mortals who had witnessed fate itself written in bronze and flesh. The Trojan chief stood alone among the carnage, Vulcan's divine armor gleaming like captured starlight. But his victory felt hollow as autumn wind through empty chambers. He had won a kingdom, claimed a bride, fulfilled the prophecies that had driven him across wine-dark seas. Yet the taste in his mouth was bitter as wormwood, salt as tears. Part 74. This was the moment Virgil had labored 7 years to create. The climactic instant where personal choice collides with cosmic necessity, where mercy dies on the altar of vengeance, where the founding of civilization requires the sacrifice of everything gentle in the human heart. For the poet understood what his readers in Augustus's golden age sometimes forgot, that dominion, however glorious, is always built upon the bones of the conquered, that order's light casts shadows deeper than any barbarian darkness. The shield that the exile bore upon his arm told a different story than the one his eyes had witnessed. There, wrought in deathless bronze by divine artifice, Augustus Caesar received the submission of conquered nations, while peace herself closed the gates of Janus's temple. There, the Battle of Actium showed the city's triumph over Egyptian decadence. Order conquering chaos, the future rescuing the world from civil war's abyss. But here, on this blood-soaked field in Latium, the price of that future glory lay scattered in pieces that no artist would ever commemorate. Pallas, beautiful in his youth, struck down before his valor could ripen into wisdom. Lausus, defending a father whose cruelty he could not see, but whose blood he shared nonetheless. Camilla, swift as wind across way-tops, brought low by the very glory she pursued. Nisus and Euryalus, whose love had been pure as spring water until war corrupted it into mutual destruction. And now the Rutulian champion himself, magnificent in his pride, terrible in his courage. Dead because he loved his homeland more than life itself. Part 75. These were the offerings that heaven's plan demanded for the city's birth. Not the blood of cowards or villains, but the heart's blood of heroes, the very life force of the young and brave and beautiful. Dominion could only be purchased with such coin, and the purchasing was a wound that would never truly heal. A necessary evil that remained evil despite its necessity. The poet's voice carries the immense weight of this knowledge as he traces the arc of his wandering hero's journey from the ashes of Troy to the throne of Latium. What began as a tale of mere survival, refugees fleeing their burning city with household gods clutched in trembling hands, had transformed into something far more complex. A profound meditation on the cost of greatness, the price of civilization, the tragic necessity of choosing duty over desire, justice over mercy. The relentless claims of the future over the cherished bonds of the present. For Virgil, writing in an age when Augustus had brought peace to a world exhausted by generations of civil war, understood both the glory and the immense burden of what the eternal city had become. The commonwealth that stretched from Britain's misty shores to Egypt's burning sands, that had built roads and aqueducts and forums in lands where wolves once howled, that had given law and language and literature to barbarian tribes. This marvel of human organization had not sprung from nothing. It grew from seeds planted in Trojan soil, watered with Italian blood, tended by hands that had learned to choose necessity over inclination. The shield's imagery revealed the intricate pattern that connected mythic past to historical present, legend to history. The exile's personal suffering to the Commonwealth's public glory. Part 76. There was Romulus suckling at the she-wolf's teats, a founder born from the primal marriage of civilization and wildness, learning strength from the very forces he would later subdue. There were the infamous rape of the Sabine women and the fierce wars that followed, showing how the city had always grown through the integration of former enemies, turning conquest into kinship, defeat into alliance. There was Horatius bravely defending the bridge while his home burned behind him, demonstrating that individual courage could preserve collective identity when survival seemed utterly impossible. There was Cloelia escaping across the Tiber, proving that the city's women possessed the same virtue as its men, that the Commonwealth's strength flowed from both genders, sharing its burdens and its glory. But the shield's center blazed with contemporary triumph. Augustus himself at Actium, receiving divine favor as he restored order to a world that had forgotten the meaning of peace. Apollo bent his golden bow above the battle while eastern forces fled toward the Nile's mouth, their defeat marking the end of an era when citizens killed citizens in pursuit of personal ambition. The victor stood resplendent in his glory, but his triumph was also an immense burden. The weight of ruling justly, of meticulously maintaining the peace that had cost so much to achieve. Virgil had lived through those brutal civil wars that preceded Augustus's victory. He had seen the proscription lists posted in the Forum, had watched friends and neighbors murdered for their political opinions, had witnessed the Republic's slow, agonizing death by suicide as it tore itself apart in fratricidal fury. The poet knew what chaos looked like, understood what civilization truly meant, because he had watched it nearly perish. His epic was both celebration and warning. Celebration of what the city had achieved. Warning of what it might lose if it forgot the virtues that had made achievement possible. Part 77. The connections between mythic past and political present ran deeper than mere allegory. Augustus himself claimed direct descent from Iulus, the exile's son, making the Aeneid a family history as well as a national epic. The emperor's adoptive father, Julius Caesar, had traced his lineage back to Venus through the same genealogical chain that made the Trojan prince semi-divine. What seemed like ancient legend was also contemporary politics. What appeared to be mythological fiction was simultaneously dynastic propaganda. Yet Virgil's true genius lay precisely in his ability to make this propaganda serve larger, more universal truths about human nature and the historical process. The poet understood that Augustus's regime, however beneficial, represented the end of something precious. The death of the Republic, the transformation of citizens into subjects, the replacement of competitive virtue with submission to authority. The Aeneid simultaneously celebrates this transformation and profoundly mourns what was lost in achieving it. The exile's character embodies this inherent ambivalence. He is dutiful where Achilles was willful, pious where Odysseus was cunningly clever, devoted to the collective good where Homeric heroes relentlessly pursued personal glory. He represents a new kind of heroism, one appropriate to an age that valued order above individual excellence, stability above competitive achievement. Yet this very virtue makes him somehow less compelling than his Greek predecessors, more admirable perhaps, but less vivid, less immediate, less recognizably human in his passions and weaknesses. The poet's treatment of love throughout the epic reveals the same tension between public necessity and private desire. Dido's consuming passion for the wandering prince produces some of the most beautiful poetry in any language, but it must be tragically sacrificed to the appointed lot. Part 78. Lavinia. The bride whose marriage will unite two peoples remains virtually voiceless throughout the entire poem, a symbol rather than a character, a prize rather than a person. Even the pure, fierce love of Nisus and Euryalus becomes an instrument of destruction when channeled through war's relentless necessities. This subordination of personal feeling to political purpose profoundly reflects the Augustan age's ambivalent relationship with emotion itself. The emperor's regime promised order, prosperity, and peace in exchange for the passionate, often dangerous, engagement that had characterized Republican politics. Citizens were asked to trade the dangerous freedom to make bad choices for the security of having good choices made for them. The Aeneid both justifies this bargain and unflinchingly reveals its psychological costs. Virgil's literary technique mirrors his thematic concerns. Where Homer's heroes speak in their own distinct voices, revealing character through direct expression, the Aeneid's figures often seem to speak with the poet's voice. Their individual personalities subsumed into the larger, inexorable patterns of historical inevitability. This creates a different kind of poetry, more meditative, more melancholy, more consciously aware of the vast, often tragic, gap between human aspiration and cosmic design. The poet's relationship with his Homeric models shows the same complex mixture of homage and profound transformation. The Aeneid's first half deliberately echoes the Odyssey's wandering narrative, while its second half reworks the Iliad's martial themes. But Virgil transforms his sources in ways that reflect changed historical circumstances and evolved literary sensibilities. His war scenes emphasize suffering more than glory. His wandering episodes stress duty more than adventure. His divine interventions serve larger, predetermined purposes than the personal whims that motivate Homer's gods. Part 79. The influence of Greek philosophy, particularly Stoicism, runs throughout the epic in ways that would have been impossible for Homer. The concept of fate that drives the narrative is not the capricious fortune of archaic thought, but the rational providence of philosophical reflection. The gods themselves, though they retain their mythological personalities, serve a cosmic order that tends toward justice and harmony rather than mere power and passion. This philosophical dimension gives the Aeneid a depth of reflection that its models lack. But it also creates a certain distance between reader and text. We admire the wandering prince's virtue without necessarily feeling the immediate connection that Homer's flawed, more human heroes inspire. Virgil's achievement is different from Homer's, less primitive, more sophisticated, but also somehow less urgent, less emotionally direct. The poet's use of prophecy throughout the epic serves multiple functions beyond mere plot advancement. When Anchises reveals the future souls of the city in the underworld, when the shield displays scenes of coming history, when various oracles and omens point toward the allotted end, Virgil is not simply showing off his knowledge of subsequent events. He is demonstrating how individual actions connect to larger patterns, how personal choices serve purposes beyond their immediate intentions. This prophetic structure also allows the poet to address his contemporary audience directly while maintaining the fiction of ancient narrative. When Anchises mourns the early death of Marcellus, Augustus's nephew, the grief belongs simultaneously to the mythical father and the historical emperor. When the shield shows Eastern forces fleeing at Actium, the triumph celebrates both legendary victory and recent political achievement. Part 80. The unfinished state of the Aeneid. Virgil died before completing his final revisions and allegedly wished the manuscript destroyed. Adds another layer of profound meaning to the epic's overarching themes. Just as the hegemony was still expanding at the time of composition, just as Augustus's reign represented a beginning rather than an end, so the poem itself remains open to interpretation. Incomplete in ways that mirror the historical process it describes, modern readers often find the Aeneid's political message troubling. Its celebration of territorial expansion difficult to accept in an age that has witnessed the devastating costs of dominion more clearly than its perceived benefits. Yet Virgil's genius lies precisely in his ability to show both sides of the equation, the glory and the grief, the triumph and the tragedy, the necessity and the loss. He creates a poem that can be read as propaganda or as protest, as celebration or as elegy. The epic's influence on subsequent literature has been enormous, shaping everything from Dante's Divine Comedy to Milton's Paradise Lost, but its historical influence may be even greater. For over a millennium, educated Europeans learned their Latin from Virgil's verses, absorbed their ideas about duty and fate from his example, and understood their relationship to political authority through his meditations on governance and individual obligation. The Aeneid became the foundational text that explained the eternal city to itself and to its successors. It provided a foundational myth that made territorial expansion seem not merely advantageous but morally necessary, not simply profitable, but divinely ordained. The poem's vision of order emerging from chaos, of civilization conquering barbarism, of universal peace achieved through central dominion shaped Western political thought for centuries. Part 81. Yet Virgil's own inherent ambivalence about these powerful themes ensures that the epic remains far more complex than mere propaganda. The poet who celebrated Augustus's peace was also the man who wrote the eclogues, pastoral visions of withdrawal from political engagement. The author who glorified the appointed lot was also the artist who created Dido's consuming passion and mourned Turnus's tragic death. The Aeneid contains its own critique, carries its own shadow, admits its own costs, even as it boldly proclaims its necessity. In the end, the wandering prince Aeneas stands as a figure both heroic and tragic, admirable and pitiable. Ultimately successful yet profoundly diminished. He achieves everything that heaven's grand plan demands, but loses much of what makes life worth living in the achievement. His victory is real, but not truly complete. His triumph is shadowed by the profound knowledge of what had to be sacrificed to make it possible. This is Virgil's enduring gift to world literature. A hero who embodies the complex, often agonizing, relationship between personal desire and public duty, between individual fulfillment and collective necessity, between human aspiration and the vast, inexorable historical process. The Trojan exile becomes a mirror in which we can see our own struggles to balance competing claims, our own attempts to serve larger purposes while remaining true to private convictions. The epic ends not with celebration but with a sense of exhaustion. Not with unalloyed triumph but with pervasive tragedy. Not with the simple beginning of peace but with the bitter, necessary end of war. The future that the shield promises will indeed come to pass. But it will be built upon the graves of the noble dead, and those who inherit it will need to remember the immense price that was paid for their prosperity. That remembrance is Virgil's final, profound gift, the knowledge that dominion, however necessary, is always a burden, and that those who bear it must do so with humility, justice, and a constant, agonizing awareness of its immense human cost.